best way to deliver change in this country? You have been an activist for decades, and in recent times you've watched Occupy Wall Street, you've watched the Me Too movement, you've watched Black Lives Matter, all try to get change through activism on the streets. Does it work?
Well, you have to bring power and pressure to bear outside of the system to create space inside of the system to create the fundamental transformation you need in the name of poor and working people of all colors, not just here, but around the world. It always looks, you remember Margaret Thatcher talked about Tina, there is no alternative. Tell the people there's only two parties. There's no alternative from Wall Street. There's no alternative Pentagon. There's no alternative Silicon Valley. No, there's a lot of precious human beings down there who are poor and working class, who are doing magnificent things, and they're feeling helpless and helpless. Sometimes they follow neo-fascist Pied Pipers like Trump, and sometimes they actually become resigned and say, all we can do is vote for Biden. Well, the history of the American empire is one of spiritual awakenings, moral awakenings, political courage on the street, and then brought to bear such as to create space within a system that seems to be so tight, so moribund, so corrupt. We should never lose hope. I'm no optimist at all. I've been a black man in America for 70 years. I'm not an optimist whatsoever. I'm a prisoner of hope. I come from a people who've been enslaved 244 years on this land and another 100 years of neo-slavery and Jim Crow. And yet what? Here comes a style, a smile, here comes tremendous energy and telling the truth and seeking justice, and then letting the bodies be the color. Enjoy the culinary delight of our bodies. You don't cave in, you don't sell out. How else to live?
I'm going to have to stop you there, but I thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, my brother. Really, this is wonderful.
That was Hard Talk. I'm Jeff Goods. You're listening to CBC Radio 1. Have a great day.
Good morning, Manitoba, and hello, Winnipeg. I'm Marcy Marcusa. We're live in downtown Winnipeg on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Emily Brass for filling in yesterday for me. It is, as mentioned, 3 minutes to 6, the morning show, Information Radio on air with you till 8:37 this morning. Issues in traffic or on the drive or commute, 788-3093. Corey Funk will pick up the phone. Good morning, Corey. Corey covers the commute and directs the show. Good morning, Mr. Abby Adeyemi, behind the controls of the show, and we'll be covering weather on air as always. And good morning to Brad Lillies, who's with us with our YouTube channel today. Well, let's get started with news in our province. And you can tell by my tone, we're covering a story that we've been looking at through the weekend and other stories as well. Heather Wells is in though with updates. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, autopsies are being done to determine the cause of death of 5 family members from Carman. Their bodies found in 3 crime scenes in southern Manitoba on Sunday. The victims include a 30-year-old woman and her 3 children who were just 6, 4, and 2.5 months old. Her 17-year-old niece also was killed. The children's 29-year-old father is charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. We're going to hear more from the victim's mother and grandmother coming up. And a mother of sons with autism says better supports are needed in rural Manitoba. Ali Pumala moved from Ontario to Shiloh to be with family. She had hoped to find better resources for her 3 young sons with autism spectrum disorder. That is not the case. We're going to hear her story coming up in our next local news at 6:30.
All right. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
In our forecast today, chance of flurries this morning, snow beginning late this afternoon, and a high of -3 for Winnipeg. Well, in the show, the team from The Current is in town. You likely know if you're listening yesterday and heard Matt Galloway on the air with us here. But they're shining a light on some of the 20,000 Ukrainians who have settled here. So we'll hear more about that. And of course, The Current's live at the West End Cultural Centre tonight. Looking forward to that. A little bit later in the first hour of the show, we're going to look to the United States as we ask how old is too old, quote unquote, for public office. We'll talk about some of the criticism facing U.S. President Joe Biden, and we'll ask why his main opponent, Donald Trump, seems to get a pass on that question, even though the 2 men are only 4 years apart in age. So those things are coming up, conversations. And a little bit later, we'll talk about the warm February and its effect on medicinal plants.
On Cue with Tom Power.
As an award-winning playwright, writer, and TV producer, Amanda Paris has used her success to share the work of other Black artists. She'll tell you about her early years moving to Canada from Britain, the light bulb moment that pushed her towards writing and doing work for the culture.
That's always sort of my barometer when I'm asking people to share their stories with me.
That's coming up on Cue, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcast.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. Tens of thousands of farmers in India are marching to the country's capital today. Police issue warnings over a loudspeaker near the Punjab-Haryana border. Farmers are demanding better compensation for their crops. They say India's government has not fulfilled its promise to them. Freelance reporter Neha Punya is in New Delhi with the latest.
Farmers are heading to New Delhi despite police attempts to halt their march with tear gas shells. In Delhi, they are being greeted by familiar scenes. Barbed wires, deep trenches, endless police barricades, and officers in riot gear. All aimed at ensuring that farmers are not allowed to camp outside Delhi's borders, cutting off access to the nation's capital, like they did 3 years ago. Abhimanyu Singh Kohar is one of many young farming leaders who are rallying support for this protest. He was part of a delegation that held talks with the Indian Agricultural Minister on Monday to try to find common ground. He says protesting farmers are carrying enough supplies to last months and they will stay on the streets until their demands are met.
We ended our last protest when the government made some promises to us to bring in a law that will give us higher support or guaranteed prices for our produce. They said they will double farmers' income. Nothing has happened yet.
Farmers say their protest will be peaceful and have urged supporters to not clash with the police. Shiv Hari Meena is a senior officer with the Uttar Pradesh Police Force.
Farmers have assured us that they will break no laws, but commandos and local police teams are on high alert.
Meanwhile, experts say this protest could do Prime Minister Narendra Modi significant harm. He is set to seek re-election in a few months' time, and he will need the support of India's farming community, who make up more than half of the country's workforce. Neha Punya for CBC News, New Delhi.
The world's most populous Muslim nation is getting ready to pick a new leader. Indonesia is holding its elections on Wednesday. More than 200 million people are expected to head to the polls. Dynastic politics are front and center in this race. President Joko Widodo is constitutionally barred from seeking a third term, but he could continue having a say in Indonesia's political direction through his son. Freelance reporter Patrick Falk explains.
Thousands of Indonesians gathered in Jakarta to support ex-General Prabowo Subianto in his final rally ahead of the vote. He says he's fighting to eliminate poverty and bring prosperity to all Indonesians and to continue what previous leaders have built. It's the third time Prabowo is running for the presidency. At stake is leadership of a mineral-rich economy, positioning itself as a powerhouse in the electric vehicle supply chain. Polls suggest the former Special Forces commander is the front-runner and has the backing of President Joko Widodo. Jokowi's son, Gibran Rakabuming, is his running mate. But the president's support for the alliance is a contentious issue.
So I think it's quite a blowback.
Maxwell Lane is a senior fellow at Singapore's Yusof Ishak Institute and an expert in Indonesian politics. He says many people in the country are angry about Jokowi's attempts to secure his legacy.
It's really a referendum whether they're going to be acceptable in Indonesian politics in the coming period.
Indonesia's president sparked uproar in particular after helping to clear the way through the Constitutional Court for Gibran to run, even though he didn't meet the minimum age requirement. Some of his key supporters have since turned against him. Ex-Jakarta Governor Anies Baswedan is the main contender, but polling suggests he's far behind in the race. If Prabowo fails to secure 50% of the vote, the top two candidates will face a runoff in July. Patrick Falk for CBC News, Singapore.
The U.S. House of Representatives will vote again today on whether or not to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. A similar vote failed last week. Republicans claim he has committed high crimes with his handling of the country's southern border. The CBC's Richard Madden joins me now from Washington. And Richard, what can you tell us about today's vote?
Yeah, it looks like the Republicans will attempt a do-over later today and vote to impeach the Homeland Security Secretary again, 1 week after they failed to get the votes in that stunning and embarrassing political setback. Now, keep in mind, Republicans have a slim 3-seat majority, so they can't afford any defections or absences. Their whip, Steve Scalise, is back from cancer treatment, so that gives the party confidence they now have enough votes to impeach the first cabinet secretary in 150 years. Republicans accuse Mayorkas of failing to do his job and secure the southern border, but it's debatable whether that fits the bar of high crimes and misdemeanors. But House Speaker Mike Johnson plans to push ahead.
We have a razor-thin margin here, and every vote counts. We have a duty and a responsibility to take care of this issue. We have to hold the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security accountable. Mayorkas needs to be held accountable.
Now, even if the impeachment vote passes in the House, a trial will likely fail in the Senate, where Democrats hold a slim majority. But there's another calculation. Today's special election in New York to replace disgraced Congressman George Santos. So whoever wins that district could further tip the balance of power.
On that note, what is the significance of today's special election in New York?
Yeah, it's shaping up to be a big deal and perhaps an early glimpse of the national mood heading into November. Both Republicans and Democrats are pouring huge money into this swing district on Long Island that had typically been a safe Democratic seat. But issues like immigration and crime have now made it competitive. Strategists in both parties anticipate a nail-biter with an outcome that'll be very closely watched.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
The CBC's Richard Madden in Washington. And just minutes ago in D.C., the U.S. Senate passed a $95 billion foreign aid package. Lawmakers have been voting through the early hours this morning to pass the bill. It includes $60 billion for the Ukraine war effort against Russia, something a small group of Republicans has been fighting to oppose. There's also funding for Taiwan's efforts to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region, and $14 billion for Israel. The package also includes $9 billion for humanitarian aid around the world. In British Columbia, there is widespread misinformation about changes to the Land Act. The province has proposed amendments allowing First Nations joint say over Crown lands, but few people understand the amendments or the process. There's public fear and outrage. As Jackie McKay reports, the regional chief of the Assembly of First Nations says clearing up the confusion needs to happen now.
I think it's a threat to reconciliation and would really set us back.
That's BC Regional Chief Terry Teegee. Political leaders to outdoor enthusiasts say the proposed changes to the Land Act will go too far. The Conservative Party of BC President Aisha Este says this would push away businesses.
This could put British Columbia into, dire straits.
But Teegee says
this is fear-mongering at its worst.
BC's minister in charge of the Land Act is Nathan Cullen.
There is no veto power contained in the agreements that we've signed already, nor in the amendments that we're proposing.
BC's NDP government is in the process of updating all its legislation. It has to, in order to comply with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. So BC laws will align with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
What this is the tool to offer the province to properly negotiate with First Nations.
This will occur in cases where there is a request to use Crown land. Indigenous and environmental lawyer Keith Brown says this raises the government's bar above just consultation, which could mean less conflict.
This type of amendment really has the potential to divert things away from the court system.
A draft bill is expected in the spring. Jackie McKay, CBC News, Vancouver.
It's February 13th. Do you know what day it is? It is World Radio Day, a day when we celebrate all this medium can do to bring diverse voices together in discourse. If you love it, happy Radio Day to you. But if the idea of listening to the radio sounds about as quaint as listening to a hair metal band from the 1980s, don't worry, we have you covered. World Report is also available as a podcast, so you can still wake up to the world every morning and listen to the day's top stories when you want to. World Report now with more metal. That is the latest national and international news. I'm Marcia Young.
Fun. Good morning, everyone. I'm Marcy Marcusa. This is Information Radio on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the app or on YouTube. Nice to have you along with the morning show, 6:10 AM. We are going to get a little bit of snow potentially today, so we'll hear about that in the forecast in a couple of minutes' time. This hour on the show, the team from The Current is in town, and you might know this because Matt Galloway was on our show yesterday, but they shone a light on their show on some issues in Manitoba, including some of the 20,000 Ukrainians who have settled in our province. So we're going to hear that story coming up this hour on the show. Remember The Current with a live show tonight at the West End Cultural Centre. Also, how old is quote-unquote too old for public office? We'll talk about some of the criticisms facing U.S. President Joe Biden. And a little bit later, parliamentary reporter for the National Post, Ryan Tumulty, will join us just before 7 to talk about Auditor General Karen Hogan's report on the ArriveCan app. So Ryan joins us most Tuesdays with Ottawa Report, and we'll have that view from the feds coming up just before 7. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells, who's in our news department with morning headlines. Good morning.
Good morning. A Carmen woman whose daughter and 3 grandchildren were killed says someone in her community has offered to pay for all their funerals. Their bodies were discovered Sunday at 3 crime scenes in southern Manitoba. Friends of the 5 victims had started a fundraising campaign, but then Nancy Clearwater says an anonymous donor came forward. A Winnipeg family says a hospital and a care home system failed their loved one. Gary Davlett was sent from Poseidon Care Home to Grace Hospital ER November 18th. The paralyzed 76-year-old spent 20 hours overnight on a stretcher in the ER hallway. He was sent back to Poseidon and then wound up at Grace again the next day, where he died. We are going to hear from family in our next local news coming up at 6:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Well, we just heard on World Report that it's World Radio Day. Good morning, Corey Funk.
Good morning.
Good morning, Abby Adiyami.
Good morning.
So why don't we take like 1 second here? Let's all not go. We'll spread this out through the morning. We'll ask Heather later. But why don't we start with Corey?
Ooh.
So you ready? We're all going to answer this question.
Okay.
Why'd you get into radio? What do you love about it?
You know what? I always loved the ability to just go deeper on things. Like, you can't really do it on any other medium. I'm not just talking about deeper about like stories and facts, but understanding people. Like there's an intimacy you build with people in radio that you don't get really from reading about someone or watching on TV. There's something about that voice in your ear that it just brings people closer together with whoever they're listening to when it's just their voice.
The art of
it's so
conversation.
powerful. Yeah, and I've always, it's been something that's just always stood out to me, and it's been really powerful. It's been,
I love that. Abby, you got to hold your thought till later.
Okay.
Now you know what we're going to ask you. We'll all answer. I'll have my answer ready too, and we'll ask Heather later too. But happy World Radio Day, though.
Yeah.
Happy World Radio Day
nice
to
to be
you
back,
too.
you guys. How is the weather today?
Looking at the radar, I see that most of the province is cloudy. Though for Winnipeg, it's cloudy and it's a chilly start to Tuesday. Expect to see some snow later today in Winnipeg. Snow beginning this morning in western Manitoba and in the north. And for Winnipeg today, we are looking at a high of -3, just a couple of centimeters of snow later this afternoon. And then tonight, the light snow is going to taper off around midnight, leaving us with partly cloudy skies. And we should be seeing about 2 to 5 centimeters of snow on the ground after that. And temperature is going to be dipping to around -7 tonight. But right now, Winnipeg is at -5.
You look good. You're dressed for snow.
Yeah, I'm dressed for snow.
You kind of got the lumberjack pattern on with the red and black. I
Thank you.
Suits you. I like it. All right, Corey Funk, the commute today.
So far things are going pretty smooth out there. Haven't heard anything on the highways or here in the city. A reminder, though, for folks, for on Abinogi Meekin eastbound from Pembina to River, there's lane closures because of sewer work that are in effect till February 23rd. I'm sure anyone who's driven it in the past week or two have noticed it, but just a reminder, that's still an issue, and it's going to be an issue until February 23rd. So you can expect some delays if you're heading eastbound on Abinogi Meekin from Pembina to River. Do you see anything else going on out there, though, today? I've been noticing potholes showing up. I was talking about one yesterday, right at Portage in Main, going northbound in that center right lane, right before you hit Portage going northbound on Main. There's a real gnarly, mean one trying to eat your tires.
Yeah, I've clunked in a few of them.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have any updates on, because I'm sure they're only growing, give me a call on the CBC commuter line if you're walking, biking, driving, 204-788-3093.
Well, as I mentioned, Matt Galloway and his team from The Current on CBC, the national radio show that follows ours every morning, their team is in Winnipeg this week, and they're here to focus on our province, tell stories of Manitoba to the national audience. Tonight, that live show coming up at the Weston Cultural Centre. But yesterday's show featured a number of different interviews, and one of the focuses was on the communities of Ukrainians, on the community of Ukrainians, rather, that is here in Manitoba. Some 20,000 Ukrainians who have settled here since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly 2 years ago, that anniversary coming up in a few weeks. They visited the home of one of those families.
This is my toy, a grogger. He can make noise. That's a small Pikachu, this is a medium, and this is a big one.
And this is my rabbit.
I have many toys.
It's a game of show and tell with two brothers. Tim is 7, Mark is 11 years old. The boys are bouncing around the living room of their tidy Winnipeg apartment. A plastic Christmas tree still twinkles at one end of the couch, and a pile of board games and books anchors the other.
They learn English very fast, and they teach us at home, me and my mom. So they are our teachers.
Marina Olieshko and her 2 sons and her mother, Nila, made the difficult decision to leave Ukraine soon after the Russian invasion in 2022. A local church and a host family sponsored them to come to Winnipeg. One family member who did not make the journey was Marina's husband. Under martial law, most men under the age of 60 have to stay in Ukraine. Alexei is a minister and now volunteers with the war effort.
He helps people with humanitarian aid, so he helps with food and clothes because it's so expensive now in Ukraine. It's terrible situation. Many victims, many ruins. My husband lives at the church now. It's more safe. When rockets or bombs fly, it's so dangerous.
Their sons are aware of the danger back home and they want to stay in Canada. Marina and her mom are doing what they can, learning the language, working at a local thrift store to pay the bills, and their host family and the Ukrainian community here still help out as well.
My children know it's a difficult time for us, and one day I cry, another day I smile, then again cry, then again smile. Sometimes I feel like weakness in my body, and I am very tired, but I know we need to keep going and keep praying. And I tell myself, Marina, don't give up. Keep going.
Marina plans to apply for permanent residency here with hopes that her husband will someday join them in Winnipeg. Manitoba has welcomed more than 20,000 Ukrainians fleeing the war, the most of any province of its size. As we near the 2-year mark of the war, I'm joined by 2 recent newcomers to Winnipeg. Olha Kushnirik came to Winnipeg in June of last year. She teaches chemistry part-time at the University of Manitoba. And Kastrina Rodinants works as a settlement coordinator with the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress in Manitoba. She arrived in Winnipeg in March of last year, and they are both in our Winnipeg studio. Good morning to you both.
Good morning. Good morning.
Christina, when you listen to Marina and her family, what goes through your mind?
I have a lot of empathy for Marina. Yes, we have bad days, we are crying, then we just feel happy, but we are human, and in my family it's like the same situation. Like my uncle, he's now in the front line, and I know how his wife feels. We are together, and we have to do everything. Like, who will do it, like, if not us?
Who will do it but not
Yeah.
us? Olha, what about for you? Does that sound familiar, what you just heard?
Yes, it's familiar, and I know that it's very difficult time for all Ukrainians. It doesn't matter whether they are in Ukraine or abroad. We have to keep together, and we have to just support each other and do everything we can for our victory.
What was it like, Olha, when you first came to Winnipeg? You arrived, as I said, in June of last year.
Yeah. It was a hard decision for me to leave Ukraine, to leave all my family, my friends. I decided that it's better to help my country from abroad than to be in Ukraine and to be under the missile attack. So I decided to move and to donate to help from abroad.
Did you know anybody in Winnipeg?
No.
No, not at all.
Yes.
And so how did you find support? How did you find a place to stay, for example?
First, I appreciate the government of Canada, government of Manitoba, that they provided us with a hotel for 30 days. So in that hotel, I met a lot of Ukrainians that came at the same time as me. And then I met a lot of people and support in church. And I appreciate them for that. It was important to meet somebody who is from Ukraine, who has Ukraine in his heart, and who can just support because he understands what we feel.
What about for you, Christina? You came in March of last year. What was the biggest challenge that you faced?
Really? I'm so lucky. I'm so happy because here I had acquaintances. They just met me at the airport, and they moved before. They are also newcomers, and they just showed me all the procedure. But the huge challenge for me was that I was totally alone, without my family, without my friends, and I had to handle all the situations alone. Of course, my friends helped me, but you also cannot share all of your inner thoughts, and it's new culture, it's new country, but I'm so lucky to have such a great people in my life. My friends, they met me, and now it's maybe interesting story for you. After that we start dating, and I'm engaged.
Hey, congratulations.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, it's really great story because we knew each other all our lives, but start dating in Canada, in friendly Manitoba, and now we are engaged.
You're smiling when you're talking
Yeah.
about this.
Yes.
I mean, it's incredible. You come out of something really difficult, and suddenly there's something beautiful in your life.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that interview turned to that. That is Matt Galloway from The Current. He's in Winnipeg right now. He's highlighting stories in Manitoba, speaking with Christy Rodinets and Olha Kushnerek, speaking with Matt. The Current will broadcast its live show tonight in Winnipeg at the West End Cultural Centre. That story focusing on some of the Ukrainians who've settled here in Winnipeg, and one of them finding love, aired yesterday on the show. .23 a.m. is the time right now. I'm Marcy Marcusa. Tuesday morning, good to be back with you. Cloudy and -5 in the city. It's calm in terms of the winds, but we do have with us a 30% chance of flurries today, a high of -3, and we're expecting some snow to begin late this afternoon and maybe a couple of centimeters tonight. Nothing we can't handle. Well, let's go down south now to look at U.S. politics and look at one of the things that's developing, which is conversation around Joe Biden's age. At 81 years old, Joe Biden is the oldest president in U.S. history. It's an issue that's dogged him the entire time he's been in the role. But late last week, a report into Biden's handling of classified documents, which cleared him of wrongdoing, also characterized him as, quote, an elderly man with a poor memory, end quote. To talk about the fallout since then, Tom Schaller is with us, professor of political science at the University of Maryland. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
So what do you make of the way that Joe Biden's age and competency were discussed since this report came out?
Well, Republicans seized on it, and of course the prosecutor himself is a former Republican, and whatever his partisanship, I mean, he's not a doctor or a neurologist, so frankly, he shouldn't be commenting in a report about Biden's handling of documents, about Biden's mental facilities or acuity. But having said that, despite the partisan aspects of this news cycle and so forth, I mean, Biden is 81. That's an ineluctable fact. And yes, he's not, the same person he was 16 years ago. Who among us is? If you look at, say, I say 16 years ago because, he's vice president under Obama. Then if you look at videos and pictures, he looks an older man. He is an older man, and he's 4 years older than when he ran for president 4 years ago in 2020, and so is Trump. I mean, they set the record for the two oldest major party nominees in 2020, a record that they hold and they're going to break themselves, and they're both 4 years older, Trump being essentially Biden's age 4 years ago when Biden ran and won. So Biden's age is going to be an issue. 70% of the public is concerned about it. Whether there's stories like the Robert Hur story or not, the media is going to cover it. We could argue about whether they're covering it too much or too little or just the right amount, but this is going to be an issue that the campaign and the White House have to deal with between now and November.
And Donald Trump, as you mentioned, is 77. What's your sense of whether or not his age is going to come into the conversation? Because it seems like you said they're only 4 years apart, but now we have a different lens for them.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating is look, when Biden confuses European leaders, as he did last week, Trump does similar things, right? He confused Nancy Pelosi and Nikki Haley, who's running against him, in a speech just a week ago. And he referred a few days ago to September 11th as 7-Eleven instead of 9/11, which 7-Eleven is a Tim Hortons style, convenient market chain here in the United States, as you probably know.
Yeah, I got him here too.
So, you guys got him there too. I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
That's okay.
It's the kind of thing that, when they do it, they both do it. But people make verbal gaffes. I mean, Nikki Haley herself, who's much younger than both of them, referred to the September 10th tax. So, people who talk for a living, like on radio, and politicians, you stumble. I stumble in these interviews sometimes and misspeak. I'm sure. I'm human. The question is whether or not, voters, particularly younger voters, which is almost everybody's younger than these two guys, feel that they're up to the job, and whether or not these stumbles reflect a larger problem with their acuity and capacity to lead, or whether, particularly in Biden's case, as a child stutterer, these are just verbal gaffes that are sort of vestiges of his stuttering days. And so, Trump does it, Biden does it, but, I think Trump gets kind of a special pass because he says a lot of outrageous things, and people focus more on that than when he just makes verbal miscues.
Just looking at the pure politics of this, can the Democrats change the narrative here? I mean, what would even be the strategy? How would you even possibly change the narrative now that that's out there in a report?
I mean, it's going to be limited, their ability, and it was already out there before the report and was going to be there even without this report, as I suggested earlier. So, look, Biden's 81 years are an ineluctable fact of his existence. He can't get around it. The Democratic Party, the president's campaign can't get around it. And I think what they essentially do is say, judge him by the way he's led the country, judge him by his accomplishments and so forth. Obviously, he has staffers to help him with a lot of stuff, as presidents always do, regardless of their age. I mean, he has a chief of staff, just like John Kennedy, the youngest elected president, had a chief of staff. So is it going to be an issue that dogs his campaign? Absolutely. And I think they'll try to focus on his competency, his management, and his leadership over his age, but they're only going to be able to get so far doing that.
So you talked about younger voters, and I mean, you said obviously many of us are younger than these two men who are likely to be the candidates on either side. Donald Trump likely to be the candidate. What does that mean, though? Does that mean that if just the age thing is coming into play for some voters, lower turnout, they would not vote because they don't see a candidate that speaks to them at all, or they have an issue with age? What do you think?
I mean, it's possible. Look, the youngest voters turn out at the lowest rates to begin with, although we did see them surge in 2020. So it could be an issue of turnout, and that would certainly hurt Biden because he does better with younger voters than do the Republicans and Trump. So it could affect Biden's chances to get reelected if they feel like he's too old to get elected. Would they vote for Trump? Maybe not, but they might not vote at all. And I have young voters in my class, obviously. Most of my students are 18, 19, 20, 21 years of age. And I'm empathetic to the fact that they look at these two guys and think, I have grandparents who are in their late 60s and early 70s who are younger than these guys. Not my parents, my grandparents. And this looks like a gerontocracy run of, by, and for older Americans. And there's some truth to that. I mean, about 40% of the spending that the government makes is for Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, the vast majority of which goes to people over 65. We look like a country that's not investing in its future, that's investing in its past. And there's actually some truth to that. And so it's, in a way, it's kind of fitting that we have an 81 and a 77-year-old candidate.
Tom Scheller, thank you for the analysis. I'll send you a Slurpee from Canada from Sev sometime.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Tom Scheller, professor of political science at the University of Maryland. We have business news coming up. Speaking of 7-Eleven, business on both sides of the border. There's new research out when homes in Canada can become affordable again, or on when they might become affordable again. So we'll find out exactly how long we're talking about from a business point of view from Christely Ramlicam with our report. So that is up right after your CBC Winnipeg News.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 6:30, clouds are getting you going this morning, and those clouds are going to bring us some snow starting late this afternoon and into late this evening. Just a couple of centimeters on the way. Today's high, much like yesterday, -3. Autopsies are being done to determine the causes of death of 5 family members from Carman. Their bodies were found in 3 crime scenes in southern Manitoba on Sunday. The victims include a 30-year-old woman, her 3 children who were just 6, 4, and 2.5 months old, and a 17-year-old niece. Nancy Clearwater looks over a photo of her lost family members.
That's my daughter and my granddaughter and my grandson, and that's the baby.
Clearwater says she found out about their deaths on social media. Police say some autopsies were done yesterday, others will be done today. The children's 29-year-old father is charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. You can read more on this story on our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba. A Winnipeg family says a hospital and a care home system failed their loved one. Gary Davlett was sent from Poseidon Care Home to Grace Hospital Emergency on November 18th. The paralyzed 76-year-old spent 20 hours overnight on a stretcher in the ER hallway. His family sent him back to Poseidon after learning it would be up to 118 hours before a medicine bed opened up. But he wound up back at the Grace the very next day, and that is the day he died. Denise Ewell is his stepdaughter.
It's really about the treatment. I mean, we knew he was very ill, but it's just to be put in a hallway, transferred back and forth, just that humanity and the dignity and being treated respectfully. And I can't guarantee that happened.
Davlett's family believes his care had also been neglected at Poseidon Care Home. Now, the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority says it is actively looking into whether Davlett's death qualifies as a critical incident. Another patient died in the Grace ER on November 18th, that same day, after having waited 33 hours. That patient's death was ruled a critical incident. A mother of sons with autism says better supports are needed in rural Manitoba. Ali Pumala moved from Ontario to Shiloh to be with family. She had hoped to find better resources for her 3 young sons with autism spectrum disorder. She says they need different levels of support and therapies. Pumala says one resource families like hers need are respite workers to help when they have medical appointments in Brandon and Winnipeg.
We don't have respite. We're on a wait list for funded respite, and we've been trying to do self-manage. The only problem is we can't convince anybody to come out to Shiloh. So it's just kind of us. My mom and my family help out as much as they can.
Pumala says her family is on a waiting list for respite care. She is now debating opening a respite center and sensory gym, so more resources are available outside Winnipeg. There's a major international push to get Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire deal. Lives could be saved if that agreement is signed before Israel's military launches a ground offensive in Rafah. And U.S. President Joe Biden says the key elements of the deal are on the table.
We're actively working for peace, security, and dignity for both the Palestinian people and the Israeli people. And I'm working on this day and night.
Biden says the proposed agreement would see the release of hostages in Gaza in exchange for more humanitarian aid and a 6-week pause in fighting. Biden says a major military operation in Rafah should not go ahead without a credible plan to protect the 1.4 million Palestinians sheltering there. Environment Canada has issued another winter storm warning for most of Nova Scotia and parts of Newfoundland. A nor'easter passing through south of the province is going to bring 15 to 25 centimeters of snow and wind gusts of up to 80 kilometers an hour. That includes areas like Cape Breton, which of course is still digging out from a major dump earlier this month. Eastern and northern Newfoundland could get 30 to 50 centimeters of snow between today and Friday morning. This same coastal storm is threatening to dump a meter of snow by this morning on parts of New York City, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. You can hear the latest national and international news coming up on World Report at 7. This year's Super Bowl is going into the record books as the most watched program in North American television history. According to Nielsen Research, Kansas City's win over San Francisco drew an average audience of 123 million viewers. That breaks the previous record set by last year's Super Bowl. But the numbers take into account a far wider viewership field than what's traditionally been available. The Super Bowl was televised by CBS, Nickelodeon, and Univision, which also streamed at the same time on Paramount Plus and a number of NFL platforms. You can find more Manitoba news on our website. Just head to cbc.ca/Manitoba.
I was one of the viewers. You, Heather Wells?
I was, for sure.
Yeah, I watched it right to the end. Flipping back and forth between that and golf. So lots of good sports on Sunday. Yeah. I have a question for you.
I wish you'd ask.
I'm going to. It's World Radio Day, as you may have heard on World Report. They had a little kicker on. They were playing tunes. I thought we'd go around the team table. So throughout the show, Corey already answered the question. Abby's up next hour. I thought maybe it could be your turn about why you got into radio or what you love about radio. You've been working in radio a long time.
Yeah, you know what? I just think there's something... when I was a kid, I remember just being fascinated that people in Winnipeg were talking to me and playing, songs, things that I wanted to hear. And yeah, it's personal and it involves your imagination. You're engaging in a different way. I've always loved it.
Yay, radio. We're taking the moments today for this. Thank you, Hev.
You're welcome.
Abby's weighing in a little later. Right now, though, he has a different job. He's here with our regional forecast from CBC Manitoba. Time right now, 6:36 on your Tuesday morning. What are people looking for?
In Winnipeg, forecast for today, we're expecting snow to start later in the afternoon, like during your commute time home. So you might want to prepare for that. A couple of centimeters on the ground, and currently we are at -5, heading to a high of -3 today. In Brandon, it's mostly cloudy and foggy with temperature of -5. Anticipate more cloudy conditions with the fog dissipating this morning, and then the snow is expected to start. You should be seeing about 2 centimeters and heading to a high of -2. Thompson, it's cloudy, -9. Snow will be starting this morning, 2 to 4 centimeters also. Expect the high to reach -6. Heading to Churchill now, it is cloudy with a temperature at -10. It will be mainly cloudy, but then the snow will come in this morning and it's going to be blowing at some times late in the afternoon. You should be seeing, for folks in Churchill, you should expect 2 to 4 centimeters later. In Gimli, it's cloudy, -6. Dauphin is at -7, Steinbach is at -5, and finally in Maurice, it's cloudy and is at -4. For Winnipeg, once again, it's -5.
All right, thanks, Abby.
You're welcome.
Let's get into what's going on the commute. Corey Funk is covering that.
Yeah, well, so far it's been a pretty straightforward commute out there. Highways are looking quite smooth, and here in the city, roads are looking smooth, minus some of those new potholes, of course, that are starting to show up from this kind of freeze thaw that we've been having over the past few weeks. But I can tell you that the sidewalks are actually pretty grippy too, which is a bit of an upside of this new wintry weather that we're in. But if you see anything else going on out there, if you're walking, biking, driving, give me a call. I would love to hear from you. I generally do like taking your calls. Give me a call, 204-788-3093.
I finally cleaned my car.
Oh!
I felt shamed. Corey and I were going to a remote last week, and I still had like granola that spilled in my cup from the previous remote.
I think it was there for at least 2-3 weeks, just granola in that. Yeah.
I'm not usually that much of a pig pen, but I was. Yeah. It's clean now.
Hey, you could just leave it as a snack for later. It's fine.
Ew, on that note, Phil DeMont is here with our business report. Good morning, Phil.
I've never actually washed my car on the outside. I've never gone through a car wash with it. I just figured the rain and the snow will get rid of it. So inside, it's a bit of a question, but there are a few things from 1987 in there too.
Okay. Are you being serious or are you being like, Baja cracking a joke? Have you really never? Because there are people that don't wash their cars.
Oh, yeah. No, I've never gone to a car wash with
Really?
I mean, my car's a 2014 Mazda. That's a nice car.
Yeah.
I've literally never gone to a car wash with it.
That's fascinating. But you wash it at home. You must wash it at home. You let Mother
No. I
Nature
just,
do it.
and it's clean. It's not like, it's winter, so it's a little kind of goopy right now. But no, it's generally clean. I just let it's Halifax. I let the rain go and it kind of gets rid of it.
That's fascinating. Fascinating. All right, let's turn our attention from our cars to another one of our big assets, our homes. There's new research out on when homes in Canada can become affordable again. How long are we talking about?
Yeah, not likely anytime soon. This comes from Charles St. Arnaud. Now, he's an economist with Alberta Central. It's the umbrella group for the credit unions in that province. Says, look, housing affordability has been a problem for the federal government and the provincial governments for years now. RBC says it takes on average about 63% of your income to buy and pay for a new home. That's the highest that index really has ever been. St. Arnaud says there's three ways you get homes more affordable, make them more affordable. You cut house prices, you raise incomes, or you chop interest rates. So he looked at the three of them. The first one, home prices. In December, average price for a home across Canada, $657,000. He estimates you'd have to cut that price by 40% in order to make it more affordable according to historical standards. So that's $475,000. A gain for buyer, loss for sellers, though, because that would mean a big price drop would mean some of the mortgage holders would be underwater, and also they'd lose money when they sold the home. So, it's not winning on that side. You could raise incomes, but Marcy, if your pay went up 4% a year, which it did last year on average, you'd need home prices to stay at where they are now for a decade to become affordable. Interest rate cuts, 2 percentage point drop there. You still need home prices to come down to 25%. We're not building enough homes, about half the rate we should be. And older Canadians, I find this interesting, are selling their homes, fewer of them are selling their homes because they can't afford to go anywhere else. The home's paid off. All this to mean kind of the ideal of young people, becoming homeowners at an early age. That's probably over for the foreseeable future. That's what the new research tells me.
Oh, that's a bit of a statement, eh?
Yeah.
So the numbers on Sunday's Super Bowl are in. I know that Heather just covered part of this, but why don't you expound on how many people watched the game?
Yeah, she was right. Almost 124 million viewers. It was the most watched TV show, not just a sports event, but the TV show in history. Now, across all platforms, but it's an increase of 7% compared to last year. CBS said it was the highest post-rating season, for football they've had since 1998, so 25 years. Did a couple of things economically. It was a huge boost to online sports betting. A record 68 million Americans bet something like $23 billion on the game's outcome. Considering it's 1 or 2, it's kind of an odd bet in a way. Also showed, though, despite fragmented audiences, that live sports still popular among many viewers, and that's why you see streaming services trying to buy some of those games now. But also probably boost the sale of those companies advertising the Super Bowl. It gets a lot of publicity, but it costs companies about $7 million for a 30-second spot on Sunday's game. That's about 20 times the average cost of a TV commercial, but a 2023 survey I found said a Super Bowl ad improves sales from game watchers by 6.5%, 20% among women who watch the game. So it's actually a bit of an economic winner even at that price level.
I think there were so many things going in its favor this year. I mean, beyond the Taylor Swift connection stuff, which did amp up viewership for sure. It was also just for me, I watch Super Bowls, but it's a boring game. I turn it off. Right?
Yeah.
I don't have the same thing invested community-wise like I do in the CFL as a Canadian. But, I mean, going in, you knew this was going to be a fight. And, I mean, over time, it was a great game, right?
Well, I mean, my thing is I never watched the Super Bowl, and I thought the first half was just a barking turkey. But then it kind of turned around. The second half became much better. That was a terrible game, the first half. But I like the halftime show, and I hate halftime shows.
No, the halftime show was amazing, but I love Usher. So it wasn't hard for me to love it. But...
Especially when he took off his shirt, right? Yeah.
No, I wouldn't have said that. But the first half of the half of the game, you thought was was boring. That's interesting. I was like, oh man, this is going to be tight.
But it was 3-0 or whatever it was, 10-9.
Not high
It was just
scoring.
there wasn't a lot going on.
Yeah,
It was like one of those defensive battles you don't see in the CFL. You see them in the NFL.
Fair enough. Before we actually look at the markets today, why don't we talk about the price of people's chocolate? The price of our favorites might be going up.
Yeah, cocoa prices hit their highest level ever this month. That means everything that uses chocolate might be going up in price as well. Futures up close to $1,000 so far this year. So in February, a futures contract cost $5,800. So you're talking 20%. Go back to last January, cocoa prices have doubled. Disease hurt the crop last year, especially something called swollen shoot virus. But bad weather is a big problem, leading to a shortfall, about 100,000 tons last year. El Nino means that weather in West Africa is hotter and it's drier, and that hurts. That means lower crop yields, and that's 70% of the world's cocoa bean production. But because the weather phenomenon is more or less permanent, analysts think you're heading for a time of long-standing lower crop yields. Between 2021 and 2023, African cocoa prices dropped. Output was down about 10%. But chocolate prices in the U.S., I found this, since 2017 are up between 40 and 150%. So they're going to keep going up.
What's up in those markets then?
Right now, Europe has weak earnings, so Germany, France, the UK, all in negative territory. The Nikkei, though, was up almost 3%, hit its highest level in more than 3 decades. Oil up 56 cents, $77.48 a barrel. And the Canadian dollar, it's up marginally, 74.39 cents U.S.
All right, Phil, thank you. Have a great morning.
Same to you, Marcy.
And it's Phil DeMont from our CBC Business Desk. It's Tuesday morning, and great to be back with you. Thank you very much to Emily Brass for hosting yesterday. Cloudy in Winnipeg. It is -5. We are expecting some snow today, high of -3. So mostly the flurries throughout the daytime. The snow, I should say, probably late this afternoon into tonight, and then mainly cloudy. We're looking for probably about a couple of centimeters of snow in our forecast. It's also, by the way, -5, not just Winnipeg, but Brandon. And up in Thompson this morning, the temperature is -9. Well, still ahead on the program after 7 o'clock, we are going to be hearing from our mental health columnist, Mark Hennick, after 8 this morning. He's going to talk about mental illness and recovery. He's looking at how assumptions about mental illness, including ideas about whether they're treatable or not, are right now playing into the conversation and the debate about possibly expanding medical assistance and dying to those with mental illness. So we'll have more from Mark coming up a little bit later. We're also going to hear a Manitoba woman's experience as well. Right now, speaking of Manitoba, Burnstick's debut album, Key and Al, garnered a Juno nomination. You might remember that back in 2019. But right now, the husband-wife duo are getting ready to share their next album. Their newest single is inspired by their son and what we all do for the ones we love. This is Burnstick on CBC. Tune's called Closer. Burnstick in Winnipeg. Their latest song is called Closer as we await their new album coming out this year. It is 9 minutes now to 7 o'clock on 89.3 FM, 990 AM or on the app. And coming up next on the show, the ArriveCan app has been under the spotlight since it was launched in 2020. You might have leaned into this news yesterday. Auditor General Karen Hogan delivered her report on the pandemic era tool. And they took a deep dive into the procurement process and a company called GC Strategies. So they were looking at exactly what happened when the government decided to make all of this happen and what they did to actually get it, into our hands and onto our phones. So let's have a look at that report. Ryan Tumulty's with us, parliamentary reporter with the National Post. Hi, Ryan.
Good morning.
So how did the Auditor General describe then the process leading to the awarding of this contract?
Yeah, she said it's just so much different from what is normally expected of a government contract. She said it was really poorly documented and that there was very loose financial controls. In terms of how it got started, the border agency realized it needed an app like this to deal with the pandemic. It said it approached 3 companies, had some conversations with them. Only one of those companies actually put anything down on paper, and it wasn't the company that was actually picked. It wasn't this GC Strategies firm. So just really outside the norms of government contracting.
What did we learn that was new from the Auditor General's report yesterday?
Yeah, so we have a new higher cost estimate. We'd previously been working with a number of $54 million. She says it costs around $59.5 million, although she can't be sure because the documentation on this, process was so poor. She said a lot of things. She said that the app wasn't tested regularly, best they can tell. There's no documentation of that. And, that's important when you factor in that it accidentally sent 10,000 people into quarantine at one point. All the different versions of it were not tested the way that they should have been. She found that, some of the people who worked on it didn't appear to have the security clearances that were necessary. So just a lot of overall problems with how this was managed and handled.
Also of note, I think, is what the Auditor General said she did not find. So you already outlined some of those things, but what else can you tell us about that, and also about what she had to say about the fact that this happened during the pandemic, because everything was going on really quickly?
Yeah, she very much said that the pandemic isn't an excuse for this. She said this is the worst contracting process she's ever seen when she looks at the government. She says, all of the sort of basic decision-making that she expected to see. The government doesn't do sole source contracts very often, and when it does, it always documents why it's doing that. The sort of details on why it's making a decision like that. She said none of that was there. A lot of decisions to extend the contracts. Didn't see any details of that. She found even that this GC Strategies firm, they helped write the rules for when the contract was finally publicly tendered instead of going through these sole source deals. And they won that public tender. No real explanation for that either. So just a lot of gaps in how this process was handled.
What can you tell us about both the private companies involved here and those on the government side involved in the procurement that were awarding the contracts, like the parties involved?
Yeah, so GC Strategies is a small IT staffing firm. It's 2 people working out of their home, and they sort of act as middlemen, basically. That they take in these government contracts and then they find the right people to do the work. And that's what they say they did in this instance. They've testified before MPs before. They've done other government contracts before as well. And they really just sort of act as a go-between to get projects like this done. In terms of on the government side, we don't know that much. We do know that 2 of the public servants who were involved in this have since been suspended without pay. That is a big step in the public service, so that was certainly a surprise. And we know there's still ongoing investigations here. We know the CBSA is investigating this, and we know they've referred some issues over to the RCMP.
And what's the government said to this?
The government has highlighted that this did happen during the pandemic. But they say that also isn't an excuse. They're aware that, something well outside the norm happened here. And they're promising that it will not happen again. There is a new president at the CBSA. The public safety minister says he has faith in her to not only find the wrongdoing that happened here, but to make sure it never happens again.
And the opposition, what's their lens on this?
Yeah, I mean, they say this is an example of government incompetence and corruption. The conservative leader was really keen to point out that this was $60 million that could have gone to a lot of other things. This could have been spent on homelessness and a lot of other areas. So certainly, they're saying that this is a real failure of the Liberal government.
Ryan, thank you for this morning. Appreciate your time.
No problem.
That is with some analysis from Ottawa, Ryan Tumulty, parliamentary reporter with the National Post. And most Tuesday mornings at this time, we touch base with what is happening in federal politics. Time right now is 4 minutes to 7 o'clock. If you need us on the commute, I'll just mention that here before we turn our attention to headlines. Give us a call. I know that I got fooled a couple times when I was driving out and about on Sunday. Now, I know conditions are slightly different, but I was sliding through some stop signs, and I thought I was going slow enough. So on some of those side streets, you still got to pay attention. But whether you're walking or biking or if you're just out waiting for the bus, let us know what it's like. 788-3093 if you do need to update the commute, or certainly if there's any incidents that are developing this morning. That is the same number here on Information Radio throughout the show. Now let's turn to Heather Wells for those headlines I mentioned. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, a Carman woman whose daughter and 3 grandchildren, as well as her niece, were killed by someone in her community, says that an anonymous person has come forward offering to pay for all of their funerals. Friends of the 5 victims had started a fundraising campaign, but then Nancy Clearwater says the donor came forward. So we'll hear more about that. Also, when Ali Pumala moved from Ontario to Western Manitoba, she hoped she would have better access to support for her children's neurodiverse symptoms. They suffer from autism spectrum disorder. But that is not what the mother of 3 found. In fact, she found few services at all in Shiloh. We'll hear from her in our next local news at 7:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
The forecast now, cloudy and -5 currently, winds are calm. We have a 30% chance of morning flurries. Our high is -3, and we're expecting some snow to begin in Winnipeg late this afternoon. Well, the next hour of Information Radio, again, it happened again. As the small community of Carman, as we mentioned, is in shock after a man is charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of his common-law partner and their small children. We are going to hear part of the RCMP press conference held yesterday, along with some remarks by Premier Wab Kinew. My remarks around, again, are looking at the death of children. In the next hour, we're going to talk to a woman who spoke out after the death of a little boy in Winnipeg. He was 3 years old. He died in 2019, and the whole community was talking about, all of our province was talking about domestic violence at that point. We're going to hear from a woman who wrote out at that time saying we need to do better for domestic violence, or we're going to see problems happen again, more loss of life. She herself a domestic violence survivor and advocate, and she's an administrator for a Facebook page called Family Court Hurts. So we are going to hear more from her coming up in the next hour of Information Radio. I'm Marcy Marcusa, and stay with us because World Report is next at 7.
You know that sending them to the dentist is not cheap.
I'm Rebecca Zandbergen. The federal government is rolling out public dental care across the country. The NDP is pushing for pharmacare to come on board. Now advocates say it's time for universal mental health care too. That's coming up on The Current.
The Current, this morning at 8:37, 9:07 in Newfoundland, and on the CBC Listen app.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. We begin with a clarion call from the federal advocate for housing. She says the Canadian government needs to come up with a plan to address homelessness and encampments. The advocate has just released a report. As Thomas Dagler tells us, it calls the current situation a human rights crisis.
We do what we can to survive.
In a park in downtown Toronto, a dozen tents are set up in a circle, one of the countless encampments that sprung up across the country during the pandemic. Candace Champagne lived here until December 23rd, when she says her tent was burned down.
It's like hell on earth. There's not much more I can say to that.
People are choosing to live in encampments not because there's something better. What they're given is a menu of worse alternatives for them.
The federal advocate for housing, Marie-Josée Houle, wants a national response for what she calls the crisis of encampments. In her report out today, she blames the federal government for failing to meet the basic needs of people living in such precarious conditions.
The solution is permanent, adequate housing, and that looks different for everyone.
Houle points to a series of growing challenges, among them a lack of affordable housing and a distrust among many of the shelter system. At that park in Toronto, Avi Ozio agrees.
Not that we're bad people, and not that we're endangering anybody, God forbid, but it's just, it's not normal for people to be living in tents outside in these situations.
Today's report calls for an end to forced encampment evictions and recommends the federal government establish a formal response plan by the end of August, before the cold starts setting in again. Thomas Dagg, CBC News, Toronto.
Farmers in India are marching to the capital to demand better compensation. Protesters are put in the back of a police bus near the Punjab-Haryana border. Tens of thousands of farmers are defying orders to stay away from New Delhi. Freelance reporter Neha Punya has the latest on the protest.
Farmers are heading to New Delhi despite police attempts to halt their march with tear gas shells. In Delhi, they are being greeted by familiar scenes. Barbed wires, deep trenches, endless police barricades, and officers in riot gear. All aimed at ensuring that farmers are not allowed to camp outside Delhi's borders, cutting off access to the nation's capital, like they did 3 years ago. Abhimanyu Singh Kohar is one of many young farming leaders who are rallying support for this protest. He was part of a delegation that held talks with the Indian Agricultural Minister on Monday to try to find common ground. He says protesting farmers are carrying enough supplies to last months and they will stay on the streets until their demands are met.
We ended our last protest when the government made some promises to us to bring in a law that will give us higher support or guaranteed prices for our produce. They said they will double farmers' income. Nothing has happened yet.
Farmers say their protest will be peaceful and have urged supporters to not clash with the police. Shiv Hari Meena is a senior officer with the Uttar Pradesh Police Force.
Farmers have assured us that they will break no laws, but commandos and local police teams are on high alert.
Meanwhile, experts say this protest could do Prime Minister Narendra Modi significant harm. He is set to seek re-election in a few months' time, and he will need the support of India's farming community, who make up more than half of the country's workforce. Neha Punya for CBC News, New Delhi.
There is a major international push to get Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire deal before Israel's military launches a ground offensive in Rafah. U.S. President Joe Biden says the key elements of a deal are on the table.
We're actively working for peace, security, and dignity for both the Palestinian people and the Israeli people. And I'm working on this day and night.
He says the proposed agreement would see the release of hostages in Gaza in exchange for more humanitarian aid and a 6-week pause in the fighting. Biden says a major military operation in Rafah should not go ahead without a credible plan to protect the 1.4 million Palestinians sheltering there. A former high-ranking member of the Canadian military will be cross-examined in his sexual assault trial today. Retired Vice Admiral Hayden Edmondson is accused of raping a woman on board a Canadian Navy ship more than 30 years ago. He has testified it did not happen. Kayla Hounsell has the latest.
Very unusual to do that
It happens occasionally on the advice of counsel.
Military law expert Michelle Drapeau points out retired Vice Admiral Hayden Edmondson had no obligation to take the witness box. But 1 week into his trial, Edmondson chose to testify in his own defense.
But it's very, very risky because the accused who testify is also subject to cross-examination with the same rigor and same robustness as the victim would have gone through.
Now 60, Edmondson is charged with 1 count of committing indecent acts and 1 count of sexual assault. His accuser, whose identity is protected by a publication ban, told the court she was 19 in 1991. She said it was part of her job to wake officers for their night shifts. And she found Edmondson, who was then 27, naked. She testified he later raped her in his quarters. But Edmondson testified he did not expose himself and did not have any kind of sexual contact with her. He also testified he was directed to retire in 2022 as a result of these charges. Criminal defense lawyer James Bray, who is not a part of this case, points out in a court of law, Edmondson is presumed innocent.
The public perception in cases like these is that a person is often guilty. And that's not the case legally. And it's the court's job to decide whether or not the Crown is able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt.
The Crown will cross-examine Edmondson today. Kayla Hounsel, CBC News, Ottawa.
For the first time, Russia has put the leader of a foreign country on its wanted list. It is the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas. Russia's Interior Ministry released the list of people wanted on criminal charges. A Kremlin spokesperson says she is responsible for desecrating Russia's historical memory. Kallas has been a strong supporter of Ukraine. She spearheaded efforts to give Kyiv more military assistance and tighten sanctions against Russia. Canada and many European countries are reevaluating their future in NATO. They're taking Republican frontrunner Donald Trump and his threat he made over the weekend seriously.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, no, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
So far, the response in Ottawa has been keep calm and carry on. But as Murray Brewster tells us, Canada has another defense alliance to worry about, NORAD.
I'm not going to get drawn into political rhetoric in another country.
Defense Minister Bill Blair taking a step back from Donald Trump's incendiary remarks.
I don't think we need to overreact, but I think we need to make sure that we are prepared and that we continue to keep our alliances strong.
Here at home, Liberals have tried to paint Conservatives as being Trump wannabes. Balkan Devlin, a foreign policy expert with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, says he's pleased with the measured tone of the federal response.
I would have actually expected a bit more partisan take on it, which I'm glad they didn't.
What concerns both Devlin and defense expert Steve Seidemann is whether the Liberal government is thinking deeply about all of the possibilities implied in Trump's threat to effectively tear up NATO. Seidemann says other international security arrangements could be taken hostage by Trump's transactional foreign policy.
Yeah, I'm not sure NORAD survives a second Trump administration. I mean, part of what worked well for Canada last time was I don't think he was aware of it.
Under the Biden administration, the U.S. and Canada have embarked on a multi-billion-dollar upgrade to NORAD and continental defense. The Americans, however, have been publicly and privately frustrated by the slow pace of Canada's investment and planning. Marie Brewster, CBC News, Ottawa.
Being a black girl in sport comes with added pressure. Take it from Canadian hockey trailblazer Sarah Nurse.
Or I feel that sometimes if I make a mistake, that's the only thing that is ever going to get talked about or is going to be remembered. And so for me, I feel like we walk that fine line where I want to be perfect so that I can set the stage for the next little black girl who wants to play hockey.
Nurse plays for Team Toronto in the PWHL. She sat down with Soroya Tinker, a former player who now serves as the league's manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion. They shared their experiences as black women in hockey and how they're trying to inspire the next generation of players. You can hear their stories by watching the video on our website, cbcnews.ca. And that is the latest national and international news from World Report. News anytime. cbcnews.ca. I'm Marcia Young.
Marcy Marcusa, this is Information Radio. We're live in downtown Winnipeg, and we're expecting a little bit of snow later today. Some flurries, though, to start. Current temp is -5 degrees, and this hour on the program, it sure has been warm overall this February in Winnipeg. We're going to talk to an Indigenous knowledge keeper about how climate change may be affecting traditional medicinal plants. So that's coming up at 7:40. Also this hour on the program, shock in Carman after a man has been charged now with 5 counts of first-degree murder and the deaths of his common-law partner and their small children. We're going to hear more in the news about developments and reaction and heartbreak and sadness over what's developed here and happened. But this hour we have an interview with a domestic violence survivor and advocate who says until things change at a systemic level, we won't have prevention of cases like this. She's going to join us just before 8 o'clock. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells for other updates on that story and more. Hi there.
Good morning. Well, autopsies are being done to determine the causes of death of 5 family members from Carman, as we've been talking about. The victims include a 30-year-old woman, her 3 children who were just 6, 4, and 2.5 months old, and her 17-year-old niece. The children's 29-year-old father has been charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. The oldest victim's mother and grandmother to the children, Nancy Clearwater, says an anonymous donor is going to pay for the funerals. We're going to hear more from Nancy Clearwater coming up. And a Winnipeg family says a hospital and a care home system failed their loved one. Gary Davlett was sent from Poseidon Care Home to Grace Hospital ER on November 18th. The paralyzed 76-year-old spent 20 hours overnight on a stretcher in the ER hallway. His family sent him back to Poseidon, but the next day he wound up back at Grace where he died. We're going to hear from the family in our next local news at 7:30.
All right, thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Abby Adeyemi, the forecast.
Currently, Winnipeg, it's cloudy. It's a cloudy start to Tuesday. Temperature sits at -5 degrees. Today, we are looking at a mainly cloudy day ahead with that 30% chance of flurries that we're expecting to see as you start your daily commute. However, you need to keep your eyes on the sky because as snow is expected to begin late this afternoon. The high for today will reach around -3 degrees. And for the night, as the night unfolds, the snow is projected to taper off near midnight, leaving us with mainly cloudy conditions, and we can expect about 2 centimeters of snow accumulation, and then the wind will shift to the southwest, bringing the low to around -7 tonight. But right now, Winnipeg is at -5.
All right, thanks, Abby.
You're welcome.
Corey Funk, the commute.
Yeah, you know, it's been a really smooth commute so far this morning. Haven't heard anything on the commuter line. Highways seem to be fairly clear so far as well. Sidewalks even have some grip to them. So overall, things it's not a bad day to be out and about on the streets here in Manitoba. But if you do see something going on, if you're walking, biking, driving, let me know what you're seeing in the bike lanes, the sidewalks. Would love to hear from you. Give me a call on that CBC commuter line, 204-788-3093.
Well, let's begin with reminding ourselves of where we're at with this heartbreaking case. And a warning, of course, we are about to hear a lot of tragic details. Nancy Clearwater lost her daughter Amanda, her 3 grandchildren, and her teenage niece on Sunday. Now, what is even more upsetting, she says, is she first heard about their deaths through social media. The 5 homicide victims in Carman over the weekend are Amanda, her 2.5-month-old baby Isabella, 4-year-old son Javen, her 6-year-old daughter Bethany, and her 17-year-old niece Maya Grattan. CBC's Karen Pauls spoke with Clearwater yesterday.
The RCMP didn't even come and contact me till 9:30 last night. So Facebook, the media, everybody knew about it, except for me and my husband. I'm numb. I'm numb. I don't know what to feel. I'm angry that he did this.
What have you been told?
Why. Nothing. They haven't released anything to me, except that my babies are all in Winnipeg. They're going for autopsies. My daughter's is today. My grandchildren will be in tomorrow or in the next 2 days.
So what did the police tell you when they finally did contact you?
They said they couldn't give me any information because they didn't know anything much at that point in time.
And what have you learned since then?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I mean, I've got a constable that's been reaching out to me the last couple of hours again, and they're going to let me know more, if anything, what they can tell me.
What do you know about the relationship between the suspect and the victim?
It was my daughter's boyfriend, the father of the 3 children.
How old are the children?
Bethany was 6, Javen was 4, and Isabella was only 2 months.
What was she like? Tell me a little bit about her.
She loved those kids. She loved those kids more than anything in the world.
She was a good mom?
She was a damn good mom.
That is CBC's Karen Pauls in conversation with Nancy Clearwater about the death of her daughter and grandchildren and another relative as well. Now, RCMP, as you've been hearing in the news coverage of this story, say that 29-year-old Ryan Manakisik, the common law partner of Amanda Clearwater, has been charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. Those charges have yet to be proven in court. There was also a big press conference yesterday. In case you missed it, here's part of what Premier Wab Kinew had to say.
To my fellow Manitobans and Canadians, you hear the officer say that an entire family has been lost. This is a dark time in Manitoba. I remember what it's like to hold a 2.5-month-old in my arms. I remember what it's like to walk a 4-year-old to nursery. I remember what it's like to hold the hand of a 6-year-old while you're crossing the road. I remember what it's like to be there with a 17-year-old. We should be thinking about grad clothes. And I know what it's like at the end of each day to share a laugh with my wife. And I think people from all walks of life in every part of this province understand these bonds because these bonds are sacred. And this time is difficult for us right now because these sacred bonds have been broken in our province. And there is no context, there is no explanation that can make this okay. This is pure darkness. But I want to say to the people of Manitoba that we are not helpless in the face of darkness. We can take action and work together to protect the vulnerable. We can offer comfort. We can offer support. We can find support in faith. I know that there are many people who will be thinking of the book of Job tonight, which asks us to grapple with the age-old question of why do bad things happen to good people? When you think about a 2.5-month-old, it is impossible to imagine that there's anything that could justify what took place. The same could be said of every other victim in this terrible tragedy. And yet faith may not provide us with an easy answer. It does provide us with a direction to be able to grapple with some of these difficult challenges and intractable dilemmas. And so I call on Manitobans, congregations and spiritual gatherings across the province to pray for this family, to pray for the people of Carman, to pray for your fellow Manitobans. We can find support in community. I know there are signs today that even in the midst of this darkness, that there is light in our province, that witnesses called for help, the people at the schools stepped up to have some tough conversations with children who are wondering where their classmates are, and that we had the first responders on the scene, law enforcement, fire, ambulance services. And I want to say thank you to all of the first responders. In this instance, and each and every day, who put their lives on the line to keep us safe. It's been said that our province exists as a collective act of will. And today, we are being summoned to call upon that will to do something difficult, to be there for one another during this time of need. Yesterday, a sacred bond was broken, and yet Manitobans collectively remain unbroken today. We will remember that this is a good place where darkness will not win.
Premier Wab Kinew speaking yesterday about the tragic deaths in Carman that unfolded over the weekend. You can read the latest at cbc.ca/Manitoba. And a reminder that RCMP have charged 29-year-old Ryan Manakisik with 5 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of his common-law partner and 3 young children, as well as a 17-year-old girl. Those charges have yet to be proven in court. We have a conversation coming up with the domestic violence survivor herself and also an advocate. She's written out opinion pieces and been involved in coverage of cases here on CBC with us, analyzing cases rather, over the years, including 5 years ago when a 3-year-old little boy, Hunter Smith-Straight, was killed. And she says we need change at the systemic level to prevent these things from happening, and she's not seeing it happening yet. So we'll talk to her just before 8.
There are stories you just can't stop thinking about. They take you somewhere, they introduce you to someone, they share something new with you. Lift off. Those are the stories you want to share with your friends, and CBC's award-winning documentary team is bringing them to you every week on Storylines. Storylines, new this season on CBC Radio 1, and always on demand on the CBC Listen app.
It is 7:22 a.m. on 89.3 FM, 990 a.m. or on that app. And in Winnipeg, -5, it's cloudy. We're expecting some snow tonight, about 2 centimeters. Well, if you were listening to World Report this morning, you might have heard them playing some heavy metal music, asking you to turn up the radio. You know that tune. It is because it's World Radio Day, so we thought we'd take a moment, those of us that are here every day on the radio, connecting with you, and ask how we got into it. So, Abby, where's your love of radio come from?
This morning, I had a moment because, getting the alert that it's World Radio Day, I had to think back to mid-80s in my life because I watched my grandpa and my dad listen to this little transistor radio powered by batteries, and all I wanted as a kid was a transistor radio because I found them listening to the Voice of America, Deutsche Welle, and I got so attached to it. And I saw this as my way of seeing the world and travel. So radio really made me know about places in the world, names of leaders, and little villages and towns. You can only find this on news programs, documentaries on the radio. And I remember getting my first transistor radio and trying to get the Voice of America because it had this knob on the side that you could switch from the short band to the short wave to the medium wave band. And I would never leave it on FM because I didn't really care about FM radio. I just wanted to know what was happening out there. I really wanted to know what was happening other parts of the world.
So it brought the world to your life as a little boy in Nigeria.
It brought the world to me as a little kid growing up in Nigeria, saying, yep, I didn't get on a plane, but I know where the Heathrow Airport is. I know where I know the Dutch. I know
education.
I know the yen. I know the dollar. I know the pound sterling. I knew a whole bunch of stuff just on the radio.
And then when was your first radio job?
First radio job would be 1997.
Yeah, were you teching then, like you tech produce now?
Yes, I was. I started, and something about my starting the radio, the first 3 months, I forgot to pick up my paycheck. I was so in love with radio. First 3 months, the accountant sent for me.
Actually, I'm as nerdy as you because I remember working in southern Manitoba, driving to my first story, and I was so excited. I thought they're paying me to go talk to someone and uncover and discover what happened to this family. It was a story on a farm. I think something was going on with crops or equipment, but yeah.
I was just that little guy. I made a note on the console saying, you need to see the accountant, 3 months. What's going on?
It's World Radio Day. If you've got some kind of a story connected to that, whether you work in radio or whether or not you're just a long-time listener, first-time caller, they like to say, 788-3205. Right now, it is time to shift gears here on the radio and to talk sports. Scott Regehr joins us with the update. Good morning.
Hey there, Marcy.
So let's start with the World Aquatic Championships. Canada has won its 4th medal now.
Yeah, courtesy of Halifax's Sydney Pickram, a silver in the 200-meter medley, Marcy. Pickram's a veteran of the sport at 26. She swam a personal best time, which is pretty impressive when you consider what she's been through of late. She had to withdraw from the World Championships last year in Japan because of what she described at the time as crippling anxiety.
Some days are harder than others. I had to pull out of Fukuoka just for a lot of reasons. Mentally, I just wasn't there. And I really wanted to be at the stage with people like this. Watching it from home was hard, so I knew I wanted to get back on this stage and just race the best I can. And I was excited to get a chance to race everyone here because it's just, this field is so deep nowadays and it's really exciting. And I can't believe somehow 26, I'm the old person now.
Pickram was asked by reporters, Marcy, whether her mental health struggles are quote-unquote all behind her now. And she responded by saying her depression is going to be with her for her entire life and that she's accepted that. And she's challenged herself to be the best version of herself that she can be. In the pool, she's certainly been doing that. Her silver, the 5th career podium finish at the Worlds for her, and she's looking for a 6th on Thursday in the 200-meter breaststroke. So Pickram, Marcy, just one of several, hopefully, Olympic-bound swimmers to watch as CBC continues its live streaming from the World Aquatic Center World Aquatic Championships in Qatar this week.
Good role model.
Yeah.
Let's move to basketball, where an Olympic-bound Parisian was having his way with the Raptors last night.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly, Marcy. Victor Wembanyama, his stat line in San Antonio's rout of the Raptors reads like fantasy. The league's tallest player is also one of its most skilled, evidenced in his 27 points, 14 rebounds, and 10 blocked shots. With 5 more assists, Wembanyama would have had the rarest of achievements, a quadruple double, and he was asked by reporters whether that was on his mind.
Yes, but I was trying to win first. But yeah, almost got a quintuple double with turnovers soon.
Hey, and 7 turnovers to boot. Good sense of humor there, Wembanyama. He is the most anticipated rookie since LeBron James, but was being compared to other greats last night with what he achieved. Those greats, Akeem Olajuwon, Ralph Sampson, David Robinson, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, they're the only other players that did what Wembanyama did last night, and that's have so many points, blocks, and rebounds in a single game. And I know Scotty Barnes was not enamored by any of this. The Raptors star was so miffed with being shown up by Wembanyama, he left the court before the final buzzer, just headed to the locker room in disgust. Yikes.
Finally, in football, we've been hearing some of the numbers for viewership already this morning, but aftershocks of the Super Bowl still being felt, right?
Yeah, including a lot of online finger-pointing, Marcy, at the San Francisco 49ers for being their own worst enemies on Sunday. Seems many of them didn't know the rules of overtime. During the regular season, it's pretty simple. If a team scores a touchdown to start OT, it wins the game. On that basis, after they won the coin toss Sunday, the 49ers elected to keep the ball and ended up kicking a field goal. KC then managed a touchdown and won the game. So these new rules have been in place since 2022, so you would think the Niners would be aware of them, but the likes of running back Kyle Juszczyk, who's a Harvard economics grad, by the way, admitted he had no clue.
You know what? I didn't even realize that the playoff rules were different in overtime, so I assumed you just want the ball because you score a touchdown and win, but I guess that's not the case. So I don't totally know the strategy there.
Where was he standing when the ref said, here's what happens, do you want the ball or not?
I don't know.
Sorry.
Or whether his coach, Kyle Shanahan, who says that he told all his players, the rules. In any case, it's not like no one tuned into this blunder, as you alluded to. This was the most watched Super Bowl in history, including here in Canada. 12.6 million at one juncture were tuning in. My research suggests that this is the 4th most watched English language sporting event in Canadian history. The other 3 all coming from the Vancouver Olympics. So, yeah, people tuned in to see that blunder. Will we tune in and hear about moves made by the Bombers today? Free agency opens up at 11 this morning, Central Time. I don't expect there'll be huge players just because they've already spent so much money re-upping with their most important players like Brady Oliveira.
All right, thanks, Scott.
You bet.
Still ahead, we're going to hear from an Indigenous knowledge keeper after the news about how the unseasonable warm temperatures we've had this winter have been impacting medicinal plants. So stay tuned for that. If you need to reach us on the commute, it's been fairly uneventful so far, which is good news. 788-3093 if you need us.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 7:30, it's still -5. Snow is on the way. Expect about 2 centimeters starting late this afternoon and continuing until late tonight. A Carmen woman whose daughter and 3 grandchildren were killed says someone in her community has offered to pay for all their funerals. Their bodies were discovered Sunday at 3 crime scenes in southern Manitoba. Friends of the 5 victims had started a fundraising campaign, but then Nancy Clearwater says an anonymous donor came forward.
Shocked and in disbelief that somebody would do this. She was well known throughout the whole community. She loved those kids. She loved those kids more than anything in the world.
Clearwater's grandchildren were 6, 4, and 2.5 months old. Her daughter was 30, and her 17-year-old niece also was killed. Autopsies are being done to determine the causes of death. The children's 29-year-old father has been charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. Just out this hour, a call to action by Canada's federal housing advocate. It comes in a new report on homelessness and ongoing growth of homeless encampments, which are being referred to as a human rights crisis. Federal housing advocate Marie-Josée Houle wants a national response for what she calls the crisis of encampments.
The solution is permanent, adequate housing, and that looks different for everyone.
Houle points to what she says is a series of growing challenges, like the lack of affordable housing and a distrust of the shelter system. Her report calls for an end to forced evictions of encampments and recommends the federal government drop a formal response plan by the end of August. A Winnipeg family says a hospital and a care home system failed their loved one. Gary Davlett was sent from Poseidon Care Home to Grace Hospital Emergency on November 18th. The paralyzed 76-year-old spent 20 hours overnight on a stretcher in the ER hallway. His family sent him back to Poseidon after learning it could be up to 118 hours before a medicine bed opened up. But he wound back up at the Grace Hospital the very next day, where he died. Denise Ewell is his stepdaughter.
It's really about the treatment. I mean, we knew he was very ill, but it's just to be put in a hallway, transferred back and forth, just that humanity and the dignity and being treated respectfully. And I can't guarantee that happened.
Davlett's family believes his care had also been neglected at Poseidon Care Home. The Winnipeg Regional Health Authority says it is actively looking into whether Davlett's death qualifies as a critical incident. Another patient died in the Grace ER also on November 18th after waiting 33 hours. That patient's death was ruled a critical incident. When Ali Pumala moved from Ontario to Western Manitoba, she hoped she'd have better access to support for their neurodiverse children. But the mother of 3 says she found few services in Shiloh. Pumala's sons are under the age of 7. They all have autism spectrum disorder. She says they need different levels of support. Pumala says one of the biggest things that would help her family is respite support for their medical trips.
It's frustrating because I see my son desperately needing these services, and he's not getting it, and I'm forced to become his therapist. I'm no longer, I'm his mom, but I'm his therapist now because we can't access the programs he needs.
Pumala is debating opening a sensory gym and a respite center, saying such resources are very needed outside Winnipeg. Indian security forces fired tear gas today to stop thousands of farmers from marching to the capital, New Delhi. Video showing a series of tear gas canisters going off, followed by clouds of smoke. The protesting farmers try to run away from the irritating smoke. They want better prices for their crops, from the government. You can hear more on this story as well as other national and international news coming up on World Report at 8. Northwest Ontario's Liquor Control Board stores are taking a page from Manitoba. The LCBO is tightening access at stores in Northwest Ontario. 6 liquor stores in Kenora, Thunder Bay, and Sioux Lookout will now require customers to show photo ID to a security guard before they're allowed inside. It's a pilot designed to stop people from stealing alcohol. Theft in Manitoba liquor stores plummeted after those controlled entrances were installed several years ago. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thanks, Heather Wells.
You're welcome.
Abby Adeyemi, it's time for the regional forecast from CBC. What do you know?
Going around the region, forecast for Winnipeg, we're expecting snow to start late this afternoon. So it means your commute home, you will definitely encounter some snow. A couple of centimeters though. Currently we are at -5 and heading to a high of -3. Heading to Brandon now, it's mostly cloudy and you've got some fog with temperature of -5. Anticipate that cloudy conditions with the fog patches to dissipate this morning and then snow is expected. And looking at the radar now, I see that closer to Killarney and Russell, we see the snow already starting around that region. We're looking at a high of -2 in Brandon today. Thompson, it's cloudy with temperature of -9. Expect snow to start also this morning. You'll be seeing around 2 to 4 centimeters and a high of -6. Churchill, it's cloudy. It's -10, mainly cloudy conditions, and the snow is going to be beginning this morning also. And then you see some blowing snow at times late in the afternoon. Also expect 2 to 4 centimeters of snow. In Gimli, you are currently at -6, cloudy skies. 30% chance of flurries in the morning, and then snow will begin later in the afternoon, and the wind will blow southeast. You will see a high of -3 today. Steinbach is at -5, Dauphin is at -7, and Morris is at -4. Winnipeg, once again, we are at -5.
All right. Thank you very much, Abby.
You're welcome.
Let's get into what's going on in the commute. You look like you've been a little quiet over there. No one's calling
It's
you, Corey.
A-okay with me, even though I do like talking to people. It's kind of fun. But it was very busy yesterday, but today is quite the opposite. Very smooth so far on the roads. The commuter line has been very quiet. Highways seem to be fairly clear overall. And I even put a shout out for potholes. No one's actually called about a new pothole. I can give out 5 points for whoever does want to call with a pothole. They're not worth anything, but
I was going to say.
but hey, you know what? It's you'll be number one in my heart if you call with a fresh pothole. But that's how calm it is out there this morning. But if it's not calm where you are, I know things change quickly in the city. Give me a call, 204-788-3093.
All right. Thanks, Corey.
Thank you.
Next on the show, the last few weeks have been unseasonably warm in Winnipeg, as you know. Some say it's because of El Nino, where others wonder if it's climate change. But what about the potential impact climate change has on plants? Now, not just any plants. Next, we're going to talk about traditional medicinal plants in Manitoba. Audrey Logan knows all about them. She's an Indigenous knowledge keeper in Winnipeg, and we reached her this morning to talk about that. Hi, Audrey.
Hello. How
are
you
you?
doing?
I'm good. I remember visiting you years ago to learn about medicinal plants, and you were digging with your worms in your place there. Are you still all up to all things plants and helping to teach people in Manitoba?
Yes, at Spirit Park, 200 Yonge Street. I'll be starting in May on Saturdays from 10 to 12. We have 10 plots there for the public to pick from, and it's able to showcase Indigenous planting methods.
That's
and
fantastic.
Such. We already did one this January.
It's fantastic. So what have you noticed, speaking of January, supposed to be wintry, what have you seen in terms of how traditional plants are growing in this climate right now?
It's definitely been a big change. A change I've been seeing coming for many, many years. Back in 2015 when the first snow came down, it was totally different than usual. It came down like little pellets. We also watched the insects and the animals, and they've definitely changed their behaviors. We have more insects from south that should not be here, but they are.
What's the best weather for some of the traditional medicinal plants that you work with? Is it colder weather, or is it wetter weather? Like, what's the ideal weather?
Well, it changes for every plant, and that's why plants their seeds can stay dormant for decades to thousands of years, just waiting for the right environment. And this past summer, I remember seeing someone post almost a whole field of echinacea that all of a sudden just bloomed and grew, and they never seeded that, but it stayed dormant. So
it's amazing, isn't it?
I'm not worried about the plants as much as I'm worried about people who gather, especially when you're out and you're gathering plants that may have a slight toxicity to them. They will become more toxic.
Why is that?
Well, because plants want to protect themselves. And they're living things.
So I'm going to walk us through a few things here. I know maple trees and sweetgrass are considered to be important traditional medicinal plants. Mm-hmm. How do you think the weather's impacting those plants specifically, maple trees and sweetgrass?
Well, when trees don't get a chance to rest, they tend to not put out as much sap, or they will start earlier. Last year, I noticed many were saying that the trees were way early when it came to tapping. Right now, people are tapping, but in some areas, some elders are saying don't tap at all this year because we need to give the trees a chance to rest and recoup from this change in weather, as well as sweetgrass. Sweetgrass loves the water, and so with us draining the water systems and not having as much water in our aquifers, it is changing that plant itself too. Now, they will move. Plants do move, and it's amazing how they do, but we just got to be prepared. And best way to do that is to find local sources instead of going out and harvesting areas that might be already depleted.
So let's elaborate on that a little bit, the protocols around gathering plants, because are they stringent enough in your view, or are you seeing you worry about people just taking a bunch and then it's going to affect future harvest?
Oh, definitely. I've heard many times Birds Hill Park is being stripped of sage, yet no one's out there in the spring tending to it, cultivating it, in the sense of pinching the tops so that way the plant branches more and produces better seed and more seed. People aren't doing that anymore. They're just going in the fall and harvesting, and not just those, but berries and other such things. We've noticed that they're flowering earlier. Then their berries aren't staying on as long. So there is a definite change, and it's something we've been warning about for a very long time. So get involved with your local food producers, such as Direct Farm Manitoba and Fireweed Food Hub. There's also Adagio Acres. There's our Good Food Club in West Broadway, as well as I'll be teaching there at the park. So that way people can come and learn a bit about the plants and things you can do to get the food.
How extensive is just speaking personally to you now, about your own practices, how extensive are your foraging practices in the city? Like, are you exclusively eating foraged food for the most part?
It's a mixture because I'm on a specialized diet anyway. But I locally forage, but I also depend upon the Fireweed Food Hub and Good Food Club, their market. Because you can't grow everything yourself. That's just impossible.
Yep.
And, access these places. We have Direct Farm Manitoba now, so you can find your farmer. We have CSAs now online. We have orchards that have been sprouting up that people have been planting. So utilize that instead of taking from the wild.
I always appreciate talking to you, Audrey. I fondly remember you showing me how you like to dig using traditional tools, aka really your claws. As I recall, your garden claws were antlers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you still have those around. I love those.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you for all that you do in community to teach people and for weighing in on what the weather's been like for medicinal plants. Appreciate having you on the show.
Thank you. West Broadway Community Organization is where I'll be posting my times that I'll be at the park for people to come and learn.
Okay, super. And is that on their website or on their Facebook page or both?
It will be on both.
Okay, great.
It'll be starting first week of May.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Audrey. We'll look forward to that.
Look forward to seeing you.
Take
and
care.
Others. Bye.
Audrey Logan, Indigenous Knowledge Keeper here in Winnipeg, talking about the warm weather impact on medicinal plants.
Nothing can stop an Iron Man from stepping onto the frozen river to curl. except the weather. This warm spell means the Ironman Outdoor Curling Bonspiel is being rescheduled to February 16th to 18th. Join us then for the family fun spiel we've all been waiting for. The Ironman Outdoor Curling Bonspiel, now February 16th to 18th, proudly sponsored by CBC.
I'm going to be opening that event on Friday. So yes, the weather's cooperating for that. And hopefully we will see you there for some winter fun. Coming up, you may have heard Heather mention on World Report that today, federal housing advocate Marie-Josée Houle is calling for a national response to what she says is a human rights crisis facing people living in homeless encampments. So that story's just been developing this morning. After 8 o'clock on the program, we're going to talk to someone who works with people in the city who find themselves homeless and often in encampments, who's going to weigh in. So that's coming up after 8 o'clock, rather, on the show. Right now, it is 7:45 a.m. I'm Marcy Marcusa with our team here at Information Radio on your Tuesday morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Hopefully things are going all right out there in your life. I'm just noticing how much brighter it is outside. It's not even 8 o'clock yet, and I can see all the cars out on Portage Avenue. You really notice the shifts when you host a morning show in those gained hours of light that creep in at this time of year. Well, if you were listening to the program earlier when it was dark, then you heard on World Report that it's World Radio Day, and we were just talking about why we love working in radio, but I was hoping it would prompt you to call in and tell us what you love about radio.
Oh, hi there. It's Amanda LaRouge-Tell. I'm calling about World Radio Day. So World Radio Day, wow, I love the radio. It's such an intimate medium. I've been a CBC listener for decades, back in the days of Peter Zosky and Vicky Gabbro, which really dates me. But I love it because it's so intimate. You folks used to be on my kitchen counter with me, but now you're on my phone. I can carry you anywhere in my pocket. And I can stay connected, as Abby said, connected with people on issues right in the moment. And it's so simple. There are no visuals needed between your voice and my head, my imagination. I get the full story, the full picture. So thanks for being there on the other side of the microphone. Love it.
Thank you so much for calling in. What a nice call. 788-3205. You can call with anything you hear on the program. Let us know what you think. I can't tell you how many times people will come up to me when they meet me in person after years of kind of tuning in and they say, hey, you wake me up in the morning. And often they give me a wink because I'm with them in their home, wherever you might be. So if you're just getting up and making your coffee this morning, hug it tight and look forward to what should be a decent walk-in if you're a pedestrian this morning. It's pretty calm out there. That's the biggest thing. Winds are calm. And as I mentioned, it's -5 in the city right now. Well, next on the show, we do turn our attention back to serious matters and the developing top story in Manitoba over the last few days, and a warning we're about to deal with very upsetting news about a community that remains in shock after 5 homicide victims from Carman, including were found on Sunday. They include Amanda Clearwater, her 2.5-month-old baby, Isabella, her 4-year-old son, Javen, her 6-year-old daughter, Bethany, and her 17-year-old niece, Maya Grattan. And important to say their names. RCMP have charged 29-year-old Ryan Manakisik, the common law partner of Amanda Clearwater and the children's father, with 5 counts of first-degree murder. RCMP Inspector Tim Arsenault is with the Major Crimes Unit. Now, reporters got a chance to speak with him yesterday, and they asked if these crimes were being investigated as an incident of intimate partner violence. We just have a brief clip, but this was his response.
It was being investigated as 5 homicides. Again, the why, and we're getting to that, but that's going to take time, and we want to get it right.
To talk about this in a bigger way, Kimberly Wong is with us. She herself is a domestic violence survivor, advocate, and member of Sagkeeng First Nation. She's also an administrator for a Facebook page called Family Court Hurts. And in the past, she has weighed in on cases involving domestic violence and also the death of children here in Manitoba. And she's with us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Marcy.
I can hear in your voice your reaction around this news, but tell me what you're thinking as you're, watching our province go through this.
I guess I'm saddened, but not surprised. This is Manitoba has one of the highest rates of domestic violence in our country, and yet we have almost no support for survivors, and there's very little public awareness around the truth. There's lots of myths that still exist, not only in the general public, but in the police and in our court systems. So it basically leaves survivors on their own to deal with these men who are violent.
What kind of myths are you referring to that still exist around this?
Well, the idea that one of the strong myths that these are private matters, that they don't affect anyone else, that they should be dealt with privately. There's a myth that it's just men who, get angry at one point, that that domestic violence is not a pattern of behavior, that the only domestic violence is broken bones and bruises, when we know that physical violence is just one tactic that's used. The myth that if a woman leaves, then that ends the violence, when even police know that the most dangerous time for a woman is when she's leaving an abusive relationship or soon after she's lost, because domestic violence is about power and control. That when an abuser is losing that power and control, that's when the violence usually escalates, and women and children end up murdered.
Now, we, as I mentioned, know that RCMP have charged Ryan Manakisek, the common law partner of Amanda Clearwater, with the 5 counts of first-degree murder. Those charges have not been proven in court, and we have very little detail beyond that at this point to share. But you weighed in 5 years ago. I was reading this morning your opinion piece weighing in when Hunter Straight Smith died, the 3-year-old who was stabbed, and the Winnipeg man who was found guilty of killing him was involved with his mom. And that was a case where domestic violence had played into the relationship leading up to the death of him, that little boy. I understand that now 5 years later, you're looking at the case here and we're talking about this, and you say that you're not surprised because we need change at the systemic level. Is that right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I spoke about it too after Hunter. There was a vigil for the little boy. But, initially it wasn't being talked about as a domestic violence case. It was just being talked about as, a bad man who, murdered a child. And yet the mother had a protection order against him. And that's the other thing. I mean, the highest protection a survivor can get is a protection order, a piece of paper. And yet we know this doesn't work. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous when you think about it.
What difference would it make when police label a case? They have not done this in this case. They say they're continuing to investigate. But what difference does it make if police label, call any case intimate partner violence from the outset?
Well, I think it would just highlight just how common these cases are. Again, we think of them as a one-off here, one-off there, like it's not really an issue. And yet, again, the highest number of calls to the Winnipeg Police Service are for domestic violence. And yet, where is this being discussed on a societal level? Where are we seeing laws being enacted or, even education programs? Awareness raising about this. I mean, 80% of domestic violence isn't reported to police because women don't have faith in the police or the court system, and police can often make things worse. So we're really failing to keep women and children safe. And so until we do,
take your time, please.
Then until we address this at every level of society, we're going to continue to have dead women and children.
What do you hope comes out of this? right away. You're talking about addressing this. You've talked about some of the court system, but I'm wondering about the actual safety for women and children. When you look at this from that perspective, are we any further ahead 5 years later with even giving people options for shelter? Should that be something that arises in a family?
Yeah, no, we're no further ahead. And I'd say we're falling further behind, because if you look at the stats, domestic violence cases have been rising. And, we went through this period with COVID where people were locked in their homes, and yet governments, police failed to recognize that for many women and children, home is not a safe place. And all that did was increase the violence. And so we need much more prevention. This needs to be tackled on a prevention basis, not a reactive basis.
Anything you'd like to add, Kim-Lee Wong? I don't want to let you go if you haven't spoken. If I didn't ask you about something you'd like to share this morning.
Well, I'd really like to, again, see that we have a massive public education campaign. Like, we should be teaching our children, healthy relationship stuff. But, what good is all this when there's no option available for women or for children, for that matter, where there aren't enough shelters to go to, but also why are women having to leave their homes and communities? Why aren't we taking the men who are enacting this violence away? And again, this isn't to label. Domestic violence is not done by just one. It's not one cause or one thing. And we don't necessarily need to be labeling abusers as monsters, but we definitely need to be addressing this, and we need to be putting more attention on the perpetrators and holding them accountable, and not expecting women to be doing it all and to be carrying the brunt of this violence.
Kim-Lee Wong, thank you very much for being on CBC with us this morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Marcy. Thank you.
Kim-Lee Wong is a domestic violence survivor, advocate, and member of Sagkeeng First Nation. She's also administrator for a Facebook page called Family Court Hurts, weighing in on this story that has so many people awaiting more information now. The 5 homicide victims from Carman, a mother, her 3 children, and her 17-year-old niece. Once again, RCMP say 29-year-old Ryan Manakisik, the common law partner of Amanda Clearwater, has been charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. Those charges have yet to be proven in court. Let's go to Heather Wells now for other news updates. Good morning.
Good morning. A call to action has just been issued by Canada's federal housing advocate. It comes in a new report on homelessness and the ongoing growth of homeless encampments across the country. They are being referred to as a human rights crisis. And the federal housing advocate is recommending the federal government drop a national response by the end of August. So we'll hear more about that. Also, a mother of sons with autism says better supports are needed in rural Manitoba. Ali Pumala moved from Ontario to Shiloh to be with family. She had hoped to find better resources for her 3 young sons, but did not. We're going to hear her story in our next local news at 8:30.
Thanks very much, Heather. It is 2 minutes now to 8 o'clock. It is -5 and cloudy in Winnipeg. Our high is -3. We are expecting a couple centimeters of snow tonight. If you need us on the drive or the walk or the roll, 788-3093 is the commuter line, so you can reach us there. Well, we are going to build on that news story, looking at people in houselessness and in encampments being through the lens of it being a human rights issue. That's a development this morning, as you've been hearing. We're going to talk to someone who runs Moorburg House through St. Boniface Street Links in Winnipeg after 8 o'clock for her thoughts on that. In addition, turning our attention to something much different, Valentine's Day is just a day away. So we asked people, what's your love language? We're going to get some of those answers to air after 8 o'clock. Stay tuned.
on cue with Tom Power.
As an award-winning playwright, writer, and TV producer, Amanda Paris has used her success to share the work of other Black artists. She'll tell you about her early years moving to Canada from Britain, the light bulb moment that pushed her towards writing and doing work for the culture.
That's always sort of my barometer when I'm asking people to share their stories with me.
That's coming up on Cue, followed by Commotion with Elamine Abdel Mahmoud on CBC Radio 1, the CBC Listen app, and everywhere you get your podcast.
The CBC News is next. Coming up in half an hour, it's The Current.
I'm Rebecca Zandbergen. The federal government is rolling out public dental care across the country. The NDP is pushing for pharmacare to come on board. Now, advocates say it's time for universal mental health care, too. That's coming up on The Current.
This is World Report. Good morning. I'm Marcia Young. We begin with a clarion call from the federal advocate for housing. She says the Canadian government needs to come up with a plan to address homelessness and encampments. The advocate released a report this morning. As Thomas Daigle tells us, it calls the current situation a human rights crisis.
We do what we can to survive.
In a park in downtown Toronto, a dozen tents are set up in a circle, one of the countless encampments that sprung up across the country during the pandemic. Candace Champagne lived here until December 23rd, when she says her tent was burned down.
It's like hell on earth. There's not much more I can say to that.
People are choosing to live in encampments not because there's something better. What they're given is a menu of worse alternatives for them.
The federal advocate for housing, Marie-Josée Houle, wants a national response for what she calls the crisis of encampments. In her report out today, she blames the federal government for failing to meet the basic needs of people living in such precarious
The
conditions.
solution is permanent, adequate housing, and that looks different for everyone.
Houle points to a series of growing challenges, among them a lack of affordable housing and a distrust among many of the shelter system. At that park in Toronto, Avi Ozio agrees.
Not that we're bad people, and not that we're endangering anybody, God forbid, but it's just, it's not normal for people to be living in tents outside in these situations.
Today's report calls for an end to forced encampment evictions and recommends the federal government establish a formal response plan by the end of August, before the cold starts setting in again. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
Watchdog groups say the Vatican has failed people who were sexually abused by priests, especially women. Megan Williams brings us the details from Rome.
It was February 2019 when bishops and cardinals from around the world arrived here at the Vatican, their purple and red caps dotting a small auditorium. As Pope Francis told them on the issue of sex abuse and its cover-up in the church, the people of God were watching. The people of God have been watching, and 5 years later, a group of them have delivered their verdict.
There have been so many catastrophic failures.
German theologian Doris Reisinger is a former nun who was abused by a priest. She says the reforms the Pope passed have mostly left out adult victims of abuse, the majority of whom are nuns.
It's a pattern of priests founding female congregations and then going on to abuse the sisters.
Reisinger and the Vatican watchdog group Bishop Accountability delivered a report today outlining numerous cases where the abuse of nuns went ignored. And, says Reisinger, where priests who raped nuns pressured them into having abortions. The group is calling for reparations to be paid to abused nuns and children fathered by abusive priests, and for the prosecution of priests who force nuns to have abortions. Megan Williams, CBC News, the Vatican.
Tens of thousands of farmers in India are marching to New Delhi today. Police issue warnings over a loudspeaker near the Punjab-Haryana border. Farmers are demanding better compensation for their crops. There have already been clashes with police and security. Tear gas shells are fired into a crowd of protesting farmers. Police also use drones to drop smoke bombs onto the growing crowd. The farmers say they want to hold the government accountable for not fulfilling its promise to increase their income. France is imposing sanctions on Israeli settlers who use violence against Palestinian civilians in the West Bank. The country's foreign ministry says it is banning 28 individuals from entering French territory. It says these steps are in line with the increase in settler violence against the Palestinian population in recent months. Similar sanctions have been issued by the United States and the UK. The U.S. House of Representatives will vote again today on whether or not to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. A similar vote failed last week. Republicans claim he has committed high crimes with his handling of the country's southern border. The CBC's Richard Madden joins me from Washington. And Richard, what can you tell us about today's vote?
Yeah, it looks like the Republicans will attempt a do-over later today and vote to impeach the Homeland Security Secretary again, 1 week after they failed to get the votes in that stunning and embarrassing political setback. Now, keep in mind, Republicans have a slim 3-seat majority, so they can't afford any defections or absences. Their whip, Steve Scalise, is back from cancer treatment, so that gives the party confidence they now have enough votes to impeach the first cabinet secretary in 150 years. Republicans accuse Mayorkas of failing to do his job and secure the southern border, but it's debatable whether that fits the bar of high crimes and misdemeanors. But House Speaker Mike Johnson plans to push ahead.
We have a razor-thin margin here, and every vote counts. We have a duty and a responsibility to take care of this issue. We have to hold the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security accountable. Mayorkas needs to be held accountable.
Now, even if the impeachment vote passes in the House, a trial will likely fail in the Senate, where Democrats hold a slim majority. But there's another calculation. Today's special election in New York to replace disgraced Congressman George Santos. So whoever wins that district could further tip the balance of power.
On that note, what is the significance of today's special election in New York?
Yeah, it's shaping up to be a big deal and perhaps an early glimpse of the national mood heading into November. Both Republicans and Democrats are pouring huge money into this swing district on Long Island that had typically been a safe Democratic seat. But issues like immigration and crime have now made it competitive. Strategists in both parties anticipate a nail-biter with an outcome that'll be very closely watched.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
The CBC's Richard Madden in Washington. U.S. senators have passed a $95 billion foreign aid package.
On this vote, the yeas are 70, the nays are 29. The bill, as amended, passes.
Lawmakers started voting before dawn this morning to pass the bill. It includes $60 billion for Ukraine's war effort against Russia, something a small group of Republicans has been fighting to oppose. There's also funding for Taiwan's efforts to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region, and $14 billion for Israel. The package also includes $9 billion for humanitarian aid around the world. In British Columbia, there is widespread misinformation about changes to the Land Act. The province has proposed amendments allowing First Nations joint say over Crown lands. But few people understand the amendments or the process. There is public fear and outrage. As Jackie McKay reports, the regional chief of the Assembly of First Nations says clearing up the confusion needs to happen now.
I think it's a threat to reconciliation and would really set us back.
That's BC Regional Chief Terry Teegee. Political leaders to outdoor enthusiasts say the proposed changes to the Land Act will go too far. The Conservative Party of BC President Aisha Este says this would push away businesses.
This could put British Columbia into, dire straits.
But Teegee says
this is fear-mongering at its worst.
BC's minister in charge of the Land Act is Nathan Cullen.
There is no veto power contained in the agreements that we've signed already, nor in the amendments that we're proposing.
BC's NDP government is in the process of updating all its legislation. It has to, in order to comply with the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. So BC laws will align with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
What this is the tool to offer the province to properly negotiate with First Nations.
This will occur in cases where there is a request to use Crown land. Indigenous and environmental lawyer Keith Brown says this raises the government's bar above just consultation, which could mean less conflict.
This type of amendment really has the potential to divert things away from the court system.
A draft bill is expected in the spring. Jackie McKay, CBC News, Vancouver.
It is February 13th. Do you know what day it is? It is World Radio Day, a day when we celebrate all this medium can do to bring diverse voices together in discourse. If you love it, happy World Radio Day to you. If not, we still have you covered. World Report is available as a podcast, so you can still wake up to the world every morning and listen to the day's top stories when you want to. And that is World Report. I'm Marcia Young.
Connection has been stories that you went through where a DJ saved you by helping you find a place to eat in the middle of the night. We'll get some of those stories and listener lines on air in this half hour of Information Radio. I'm Marcy Marcusa. Good morning. You're on 89.3 FM, 990 AM on the CBC Listen app, or maybe you're watching on our YouTube channel. Well, in addition to that, we're going to build on the news today that just came out. The new report on tent encampments across Canada calling for urgent action from all levels of government to end what the Federal Housing Advocate is saying is a, quote, life and death crisis, end quote. So in case you missed that story on World Report, we're going to review some of the calls to action, that were outlined in this brand new report. We are also going to talk to two local housing advocates that have been involved in the community for a long time about their view on the report through a Manitoba lens. So stay tuned. That's all coming up this half hour. Right now, let's go to Heather Wells, who joins us. Good morning.
Good morning. A Carman woman whose daughter and 3 grandchildren and her niece were killed by someone in her community says that someone's offered to pay for all of their funerals. The bodies were discovered Sunday at crime scenes in southern Manitoba. Friends of the 5 victims started a fundraising campaign, but then Nancy Clearwater says an anonymous donor came forward to help. A Winnipeg family says a hospital and a care home system failed their loved one. Gary Davlett was sent from Poseidon Care Home to Grace Hospital Emergency Room November 18th. The paralyzed 76-year-old spent 20 hours overnight on a stretcher in the ER hallway. His family sent him back to Poseidon, but the next day he wound up back at Grace, where he died. We're going to hear their story coming up in our next local news at 8:30.
Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Abby Adeyemi, the forecast.
In Winnipeg, we're expecting to see some snow later today. Currently, we are at -5 degrees, and then snow is going to be beginning in this morning for western Manitoba and, of course, in the north. But today, we're looking at a high of -3 and just a couple of centimeters of snow starting as you drive home today. Currently, we are at -5.
Corey Funk?
Commute's looking lovely. Roads are clear. Highways seem to be clear. There was actually, so far it's not too bad. There was one call I got northbound St. Mary's in the left lane. There was a stalled vehicle. This was about 15 minutes ago. And it's actually backed up all the way to St. Anne's. So just do look out for that. That's at northbound St. Mary's at Traverse. Thanks for Sheila for that call. Causing pretty big backups there. So keep right to get around that. If you see anything else, though, give me a call on the CBC commuter line. That number 204-788-3093.
So as I just mentioned, there is news developing right now. Just out this morning, Canada's Federal Housing Advocate has made an urgent call to action to address homelessness in our country. Marie-Josée Hull has released a report. She says it's the first of its kind in Canada. It's called Upholding Dignity and Human Rights. It outlines 6 calls to action to address ongoing homeless encampments across this country, like speedy solutions to permanent housing issues and an end to forced encampment evictions. Those are a couple of the calls. It also calls to have a national encampments response plan in place this year by August 31st. To talk about it, Marion Willis is with us, Executive Director of St. Boniface Street Links and Moorburg House. Good morning.
Good morning.
And we also have Al Wiebe, who's joined us right now, who's long worked with houseless populations and recently organized conferences as well to talk about people in Winnipeg and how we can do better. Good morning, Al.
Good morning, Marcy. Thanks for having me.
So, Marion, what's your response to to this advocate saying this is urgent? We want to plan this year.
Well, I couldn't agree with the advocate more. We have certainly it's appropriate for the federal government to get busy and to develop a national strategy to end homelessness right across this country. But it needs to be a strategy that considers and plans for the reasons why there's so many people that are living homeless. You know, where the whole country is living through a post-pandemic period right now, where mental health and addictions predominate, where there's just an untold level of violence across this country. And certainly we see it in the city and in the province of Manitoba. All of these issues are linked. We have way too many people just out there barely surviving. And any strategy to address homelessness and get people out of encampments needs to be an inclusive strategy. It needs to understand that the demographical face has changed.
I'm going to ask you to build on that in a moment, that the demographic face has changed. But I want to go to Al and find out your reaction, Al, to this urgent call for change.
Yeah, I totally agree with most everything that was said. Now, I was part of the discussion back when the Jose Marie was in Winnipeg for the CHRA conference. I think that, again, the ultimate goal is housing. Housing geared to income and housing that people can afford to live in. Again, people are in camps, because a lot of them, because of fear of shelters. And at the moment, we just simply don't have enough housing for people in camps to go to. We need to have that addressed, as the advocate mentioned. And, as far as, they have a lot of barriers. People in camps have a lot of barriers. And one of them is of course, the removal of camps by the police and other government elements. And I think that that really has to be addressed. And ironically, today I'm spending 3 hours with the chiefs and the leadership team at the Winnipeg Fire Medic Service on this very subject. It's really important that again, we realize that they have human rights just like everybody else.
This then will be met if these steps that are suggested here, these 6 calls to action actually happen. One of them is to end forced evictions of encampments, and to put in place, it says, alternatives that are designed following meaningful engagement with encampment residents. So that's exact language from this. Just to go back to you, Marion, to build on what you said demographically we need to understand the face of homelessness has changed. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Well, I don't know if you realize this, but the city began to fund our outreach team 3 years ago. It'll be 3 years at the end of this March. And we have just finished our report that brings us right up to today. And as of yesterday, our organization has housed 927 people in 35 months out of encampments, transit shelters, other private public spaces in the city. And if you look at our data in terms of who those people are, 60% of them are Indigenous. 40% of them are just other people. Of the 60% that are Indigenous, about 40% of them are people that meet the criteria for support through reaching home, and the rest of them don't. And so if you look at homelessness in this city, if you look at 100% of homelessness, you find that about 70% of people living homeless are being left behind. There is no funded strategy to end homelessness for them. And Al is quite right in his contention that we don't have enough housing to house everybody, and that's really important. But if we're going to plan for a national strategy, we need to really consider the post-pandemic period right across Canada and understand that the demographical face has changed. The reaching home Sorry.
No, I was just going to go back to Al in a moment. Finish your thought, please.
The Reaching Home Agreement was designed, I think, and implemented back in, I don't know, maybe around 2012 to 2015 in that period. And during that period, up to the pandemic, really, the demographical face of homelessness in the city was largely Indigenous. And the agreement really matched the population. It doesn't anymore. And so that's what needs to change. The federal government needs to understand that, that it's national. Sorry.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm just going to interject because I do want to let people to know that the advocate, when she was putting this together, Winnipeg was one of the cities she visited. So I want people to know that when they were putting these calls to action together, we were factored in with real experience. So sometimes we're not involved in the research. I want to ask you, Al, you said that one of the points here, the calls to action, says to address the root causes of encampments. You had said just moments ago, often people are in encampments because they don't feel safe in shelters. Now, I can't verify whether shelters individually are safe or not safe, so that's not the point of this. But what is the environment that people are looking for to feel safe? If you could elaborate on that when when you talk to people.
Yes, I'm vice chair of the Community Advisory Board. We kind of dictate where the money goes to for homelessness and housing and that kind of thing. And as a part of that, we go into the different shelters and spend time and overlook. And I've been in several shelters, and every single time we go in, there's an issue of violence. Something happens. Windows get broken, doors get broken. People become erratic. And, that goes with the territory and the fentanyl situation these days. And it is a problem for a lot of folks. And, even when I was in Salvation Army 12 years ago, there was violence in it. 2 murders happened in the shelter. And I think, it is a safety issue. And I know from experience that it is.
Well, what else draws people to choose encampments, Al, from the people you talk to in Winnipeg?
It's a big thing. And people need community, and community keeps people alive out there. And that's a really big issue. And so they can spend time together. It's like a big family. And people, sometimes if you I've done a lot of exploring of camps and talking to people in camps, and you'll see camps under bridges that look like little communities with fences and artificial grass laid down and things like that. It's really important that people understand. People need to be together for a community. And, the shelters also don't allow females and males to mix, to have relationships in their facilities. And so people turn to for that.
Let me just ask you as the last question, each of you, how hopeful are you that what we're talking about this morning will actually have teeth? Because we've seen a lot of reports in the past, Marion. I don't want to sound cynical, but my question is, how hopeful are you this will have teeth?
Well, I'm left feeling somewhat hopeful. I actually met with Mayor Gillingham in December about this very issue. And I really sense that on his part, he does have a keen desire to try to end homelessness in this city. We have a new NDP government, and I have a lot of faith in Nawab Kanu and his team. I believe they are very committed also to ending homelessness. Whether they can do it really hinges on whether they understand or not the need to address ending homelessness for all members of our human family. We have to serve the 70% that are being left behind, because that's where all. Sorry.
No, finish your thought, please. I'm sorry.
Because that's where you see the violence, you see the gang activity, you see the overdose deaths, you see all the horrific stats are being created amongst people living homelessness within that 70% of homelessness that is indeed being left behind. We need a new national strategy to end homelessness, but within that strategy, that needs to address
They have to address
everything.
that population. Yep.
And it has to address addictions and mental health and the reasons why people are spiraling into homelessness.
Al,
it needs to be a part of a federal post-pandemic plan.
I want to give Al the last word here and just give him the last word on this. Al, Marion said she is left feeling somewhat hopeful. What about you?
Yeah. I also am somewhat hopeful. The federal government released, $122 million for Winnipeg. They actually have about 40 of it right now sitting in their coffers. The unfortunate part about that is that there's no mandate for low-income housing, but there is room to maneuver in that document. But I think in Manitoba, in particular, we have a good relationship between the city and the province for the first time in 100 years. What it seems like there's always a struggle going on there, and I think.
So you're hopeful about that relationship as well.
So I am optimistic about it.
I know that we will talk much more about this. We literally had this come out this morning and called you guys to see if you wanted to weigh in, given your long work in the community. So thank you so much, Al.
You bet. Thank you.
And Marion Willis, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Al. Okay.
Marion Willis, the Executive Director of St. Boniface Street Links and Moorburg House, and Al Wiebe, who is a homeless advocate and also has formerly been experienced homelessness back in the day himself, with some lived experience to add to our discussion. So if you want to read more about this, it's just news this morning. Canada's federal housing advocate has made an urgent call to action to address homelessness in our country, in particular encampments. .25 a.m. I'd mentioned that we were going to hear some Valentine's Day love this morning. However, we're switching gears. We'll get that on Valentine's Day tomorrow. But we're switching gears because a lot of you have been calling us about World Radio Day and what it means to you. So this is longtime listener Gurmuk Chacha.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Happy Tuesday and happy International Radio Day. Marcy, now I'm 65 plus. When I was 10-year-old back home India, I always have a radio with me, little pocket radio. No matter where I go, the radio with me all the time. So I came to Canada when I was 18. Now I've been CBC and many other radio stations, and I love the radio station. I have one radio in my bathroom. As I walk in, radio is on. I got one in my bedroom that's on 24 hours. I got one in the dining area where I dine my food. I got one radio over there. So I cannot live without radio. I cannot live without good friends like you, Marcy, and other people who are working in CBC radio station. Thank you very much. God bless all. This is Chacha. Thank you. God bless. Good day. Ciao. Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Sean, your friendly neighborhood air compressor guy. When I was growing up, my mom was a single mother, and she didn't have a lot of money, so she would take us out on camping trips. And during those camping trips, we used to listen to the radio at nighttime. Everything from Dick Tracy to murder mysteries to all sorts of crazy stuff. I can remember sitting by the campfire, listening to the radio, and in that world, it's like you didn't have to read a book because the radio gave you everything you needed. You just had to close your eyes and listen to Dick Tracy talking to his two-way radio. And kill the bad guys or take care of the bad guys, and Superman and all those guys would come alive on the radio at nighttime. Those were good times and good memories. Some days I wish I could do that again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hi there. It's Keith wishing you a happy Radio Day. And there can't be a Radio Day without Queen's Radio Gaga. It's just the best, and it really captures the enthusiasm and the wonder, wide-eyed wonder of listening to radio as a young person. It's a great tune, especially the Wembley Stadium live version. That just moves me. Anyway, happy Radio Day. Hope you play that song. Thanks.
Well, we can't resist. Here's Queen.
You made 'em laugh, you made 'em cry.
We are hearing your comments on World Radio Day. Audra Lazowski said, we took a road trip in our 20s, probably 30 years ago now. We rolled into Albuquerque, New Mexico, 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, road weary and starving. Nothing was open. And we just couldn't manage pizza. We had so much of it. My partner, who still works as a radio copywriter, thought to call the radio station. We've been listening to this station on the way in, and yep, those late night on-air announcers sent us to the one place still open. And it was great. Happy World Radio Day. Queen with a big finish on 89.3 FM. Your CBC Winnipeg News is next.
This is CBC News. Good morning. I'm Heather Wells in Winnipeg. At 8:30, we've got a cloudy start to Tuesday. It's mild still, a high of -3, and expect a few flurries turning into snow late this afternoon, continuing until late tonight. A call to action is being issued today in a report from Canada's federal housing advocate. Marie-Josée Houle says a coordinated national response is needed for what she calls the country's encampment crisis.
People are choosing to live in encampments not because there's something better. What they're given is a menu of worse alternatives.
Houle's report calls for an immediate end to forced encampment evictions, and she calls on the federal government to establish a detailed response plan that can be put into action before the start of next winter. She says all levels of government are failing to meet the basic needs of people living in precarious conditions. Now, here in Winnipeg, Marion Willis at St. Boniface Street Links has been working to help people in encampments find homes. She says many issues lead someone to live in an encampment, and those issues need to be addressed.
We welcome an intervention by the federal government. I think we have a very motivated provincial government right now that I think it sincerely wants to be impactful. But to be impactful, we do have to recognize the interrelatedness of all of these issues.
Willis says any initiative has to benefit every person who needs it. A Carmen woman whose daughter and 3 grandchildren were killed says someone in her community has offered to pay for all of their funerals. Their bodies were discovered Sunday at 3 crime scenes in southern Manitoba. Friends of the 5 victims started a fundraising campaign, but then Nancy Clearwater says an anonymous donor came forward.
Shocked and in disbelief that somebody would do this. She was well known throughout the whole community. She loved those kids. She loved those kids more than anything in the world.
Clearwater's grandchildren were 6, 4, and 2.5 months old. Her daughter was 30. Her 17-year-old niece was also killed. Autopsies are being done to determine the causes of death. The children's 29-year-old father has been charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. A family is accusing a Winnipeg care home and a hospital of neglect and unreasonable wait times. Gary Davlett was sent from Poseidon Care Home to Grace Hospital on November 18th. After 20 hours of waiting in the ER, his family decided to send the paralyzed senior back to the care home. They say they had been told it could take 118 hours before a hospital bed opened up. But Davlett wound up back at the Grace the next day, and that is where he died. Eddie Calisto Tavares is a seniors' health and long-term care advocate.
That family wasn't given any options. Either leave them abandoned there to no one looking after him, or take him back to a place that they thought at least he is going to be more comfortable, but then he was very ill.
Davlett's family believes his care had also been neglected at the Poseidon Care Home. The Winnipeg Regional Health Authority says it is looking into whether Davlett's death qualifies as a critical incident. When Ali Pumala moved from Ontario to Western Manitoba, she hoped she'd have better access to support for their neurodiverse children. But the mother of 3 says they found few services in Shiloh. Pumala's sons are under the age of 7. They all have autism spectrum disorder. She says they need different levels of support. Pumala says one of the biggest things that would help her family is respite support for their medical trips.
It's frustrating because I see my son desperately needing these services, and he's not getting it, and I'm forced to become his therapist. I'm no longer, I'm his mom, but I'm his therapist now because we can't access the programs he needs.
Pumala is debating opening a sensory gym and a respite center, saying such resources are very much needed outside Winnipeg. Northwest Ontario's Liquor Control Board stores are taking a page from Manitoba. The LCBO is tightening access at stores in Northwest Ontario. 6 liquor stores in Kenora, Thunder Bay, and Sioux Lookout will now require customers to show a photo ID to a security guard before they're allowed inside. It's a pilot designed to stop people from stealing alcohol. Theft in Manitoba liquor stores plummeted after controlled entrances were installed. Well, how will you mark tomorrow, February 14th? Will it be love or fasting? Traditionally, February 14th is Valentine's Day, but this year there's a calendar collision. Tomorrow also happens to be Ash Wednesday. It's a solemn day of fasting and reflection, signaling the start to the Easter season. Ash Wednesday is a moving day tied to Easter Sunday, which this year falls on March 31st. You can find more news updated throughout the day at cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Thanks, Heather Wells.
You're welcome.
Corey Funk, The Commute.
Might still be a stalled car flashing left lane northbound St. Mary's at Traverse. There was backed up all the way to St. Anne before. Hopefully it's gone, but if not, keep right to get around that.
All right, thanks, Cor.
Thank you.
Last look at the weather forecast, Abby Adiyemi.
Yes, we're going to start seeing that light snow blow across the region very soon. In Brandon, it's currently -5 degrees. Expect the snow to start this morning. You see 2 centimeters plus. Thompson and Churchill at -9 and -10. Snow's also going to be starting this morning. Gimley's at -6. Steinbach and Morris at -4. The Pembina Valley region will see snow begin late in the afternoon. And also Winnipeg, we are at -5. The snow will start during your commute.
Do people always say your full name because it's 2 A's? People always say my full name often say my full name because it's 2 M's. I wondered if you get that, Abby Adiyemi.
Yes, they do.
Right?
Someone actually called me Abby Yummy Yummy.
Oh!
There you go. There you go.
Did it make you smile?
It did.
All right. Well, thank you, Abby Adiyemi. And thank you to Corey Funk, to Brad Lillies, as well as to our news department this morning, Heather Wells, Megan Ketchison, Chris Armstrong out there today. Thank you for listening. We're not here without you. And take care, be well. Maybe we'll see you tonight at the West End Cultural Centre for the live performance and taping of The Current and performance from William Prince. So I'll be out there later. Speaking of which, The Current is next on CBC.
This audit shows a glaring disregard for basic management and contract